hold the examination and to make a binding report to the Council. Our Programme Officer today is Chris Banks, who's somewhere. He's just outside at the moment. But anyway, if you've got any, I want to stress this, if you do have any queries about procedure or documentation, please raise them with him in the first instance. I've had a couple of 2 or 3 documents just sent direct to me or left on my table. That isn't the right procedure, as I did stress that very early on. In a minute I'm going to take appearances and give a brief explanation of proceedings today. I think there's a couple of new faces around the table, but I'm going to try and cut short what I normally say about how we're going to hold the discussion, which is going to be, hopefully, a much more focused and quite a short session, I think, from what I've seen. I'll go into that in a minute. I'm just going to talk about infrastructure and monitoring today, in accordance with the agenda that's been circulated. But first, could the Council give a safety announcement, please?
Yes, sir. There are no planned fire drills today. If the fire alarm rings continuously, please leave the building via the nearest available fire exits, which is either from the stairs that you just came up, or there's a staircase behind the wooden dais here. Do not use the lifts, and please follow any staff instructions. If you have any mobility issues, please alert staff. Go to the nearest refuge point, which is situated at the lifts at the front of the building. Staff will then advise the incident manager and fire brigade, and you will be assisted out of the building. Once the all clear has been given by the fire brigade, staff and visitors will be allowed back into the building. If you should become ill, please alert a member of staff. Toilet facilities are at the front of the building by the lifts on the 3rd and 2nd floor. And bearing in mind what the inspector said, that it's going to be a short session, we might not need this bit, but generally speaking, we said refreshments are available to purchase from the Capitol Theatre next door or the cafe in the park at lunchtime. And please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off.
Pardon? The other thing I need to say is that the sessions are all being recorded. For a couple of those of you who are new, does anyone object to their voice being recorded? Good. Okay. We've not had the TV. I don't think are coming anymore. They've been and gone. Right. Can you please introduce yourselves? And I'll go around the table, starting with the Council on my left, and say who you're representing, please, if it's not yourself.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Childs. I'm Head of Strategic Planning and Sustainability at Horsham District Council.
Good morning, sir. I'm Helen Sissons. I'm Senior Planning Officer at the Council.
Good morning. I'm Emma Faith, Senior Planning Officer at Horsham Council.
Good morning. I'm Julia Dorr. I'm Planning Policy Advisor at Horsham District Council.
Morning. Sheila White, a member of the public.
Dr. Roger Smith, CPRE Sussex.
Roger Arthur, I'm a district councillor.
Tony Cox, I'm a private individual.
George Sallows from Rusper Parish Council.
Ruth Fletcher on behalf of the Horsham District Cycling Forum.
Councillor Francis Haig, Lib Dem Group and joint author of the Alternative Strategy.
David Moore, the Horsham Society.
Thank you, everybody. I've already referred to the procedural note or the procedures about dealing with matters through the Programme Officer. There was a pre-hearing note which was circulated saying how we'd carry on with the procedures. But I'm just going to remind, for those of you that are new to this, in summary, my role here is to assess the soundness of the plan against the tests in the National Planning Policy Framework, which I'll call the NPPF. And as those of you will have heard me say before, just to remind you, they are that it should be positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy. So what we're going to have is just a discussion today. If you want to speak, please raise your nameplate so I can see that you want to make a contribution. I'll direct the discussion in accordance with the items on the agenda. We if you think the plan isn't sound, I need to know what you think needs to be done to make it sound. I'm not going to reopen or reconsider any evidence that I've already previously heard. Sort of where I am at the moment is that I've heard lots of evidence. I've got some site visits to do. One of the key things we were looking at was housing provision, so I'm considering a number of matters with regard to that, with regard to the overall numbers, the council's strategy for where new housing should go, the issue of whether there are any, what the constraints are. I've heard a lot of evidence from alternative sites being promoted. I've heard evidence about the sites that are in the plan. So I'm going to go and look at some sites and then try and start coming to some conclusions about all of that when I've got a bit more time to reflect on it. And I'll try and give some indication of where I'm going to be with that fairly shortly after the hearing. But I'm not going to give a timescale for any production of any report or any document at this stage. As I said, I'll try and do something. You'll certainly hear something from me within about a month, as to where we're going with that. But I need to reflect on all of this first, because I've still got some things that I'm mulling over, and I'm not. There's some issues that I need to decide what I'm going to say about them, basically. And I've got an open mind on some things still. So that's where we are with that. I just wanted to run through a few documentation things. The council's already sent through some changes. And those of you that weren't here yesterday, we had another document which inserted some further modifications as a result of the examination. That's HDC 27. That's available to the council. I've sort of been looking at that. That's one of the things I'm going to be considering. Obviously, if there are going to be any main changes, I'll try and give the council an early indication of that, because there would be quite a lot of procedures, as you've already heard me say, would need to take place. Any such changes would have to be advertised for a full public consultation period of at least 6 weeks. And they might require further sustainability appraisal done if there's any options that would require further work doing from that point of view. Other documents I've received, HDC 28, I think I received yesterday. That was the Council's response on the proposed amendments to Policy 24 by the CPRE. You should have seen that, Mr. Smith. Yeah, okay. There are some other. HDC 29 I've been received. That's just a note about a High Court case that was raised yesterday. This is from the Council with a copy of the transcript. As I said yesterday, I was aware of that case, and it's obviously I have to take into account all legal, the law, because case law and High Court decisions are part of the legal framework for conducting the examination. As it was, I knew that anyway, about that particular case that was referred to. I've had Councillor Arthur, your document. I asked the council for comments on that, and they said that they thought it did include some new information, or would require me to circulate that to everyone and invite written representations on that from everybody who was appearing at the housing session, or any representative really. And I was going to say to you that it would be more helpful for me, I think, unless you think there's something absolutely vital in there that's new that I need to consider. I haven't even looked at it in detail. I was going to send it back to you and say, procedurally, it's very difficult to receive things like that after the hearing session, because it just prolongs the examination and, it would stop me coming to some conclusions about housing, for example. Has that been relayed to you? Do you want to comment?
I'm pleased to hear that it's going to be circulated. I think.
Well, hang on, it's not, unless I don't particularly want it to be circulated, unless you think that there's something, really fundamental in there that everybody missed during the housing session. I haven't even read it yet.
Well, I think there is something in there that's quite important. It actually identifies the fact that the number of people per household is assumed it does not comply, does not meet the 2.4 persons per household that's in the ONS figures. So it may be that it's possible that I've misunderstood it, and that means that other people may have misunderstood it too. So I think we all need to understand if there is an issue there or not.
Well, you've read this and I haven't. Can you?
I've read it, and I'm
this?
happy to speak to Councillor Arthur about it to compare our evidence to see whether there's anything additional that we'd like to put forward, and then we'll get back to you about it.
Well, okay, that's probably the best way. Are you happy for that to happen, Councillor Arthur, in the first instance? You talk to the council, because if you're submitting another document in the interest of fairness, as I've said all along, everyone has to have the chance to comment on what everyone else has said. That's the whole point of having what for me was a very lengthy and complicated hearing session on housing, to try and give everybody the chance to say everything they wanted to say at that time about the information available. Does it contain new figures?
Well,
and if it does, why didn't you produce them on the day of the housing session?
Well, the principle, the request for the data behind it, which clearly you can't have calculations unless you've got assumptions which have been validated. Now, I've done a bit more work on the validation as a result of the discussions, and that has reinforced the need for an answer to that question.
Well, okay. I'd like you to discuss it with Ms. Dorr, and if you still think that there's an issue that needs to be considered, I've got two options. I can either call everybody back for another hearing session about it, or I can ask for written comments on it and give everybody a chance to comment and see what that brings, and give them a deadline of 2 or 3 weeks or something to respond to it. I'm very reluctant to do that unless I'm convinced that there's something brand new there that hasn't been considered before, or some new statistics or information that I should have. I mean, I have to say, given the wide divergence of evidence about housing need, if the CLG revised housing projections come out before I've come to any preliminary conclusions, I would expect those to be considered and circulated, because I think they would be such an important new piece of evidence that it would require everybody to have a chance to comment on it. And I can see that there would be the same procedural difficulty there, but that's my preliminary view on that. My difficulty with that is that I don't know any better than anyone else in this room when those statistics might come out. We've been given a date of before Christmas, but then we were given a date of autumn, and it's still autumn, but we're just. So that's where I am on that. Does the council want to make any comments on that?
We always said from the outset, in our list of our evidence, we said that we were anticipating that information to be available in September, so we were going to run that information. So I'm comfortable if you feel that that's additional information when it comes out. If it does come out in autumn, winter, we will seek to run with that information and put that out for consultation.
Well, I think we would have to consult on that, really. I mean,
yes.
it might affect matters anyway. So So that's another potential procedural difficulty, but I'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I think, if we do, before I've come to any preliminary findings. What I'm trying to do, and why I'm being so reluctant to take your new piece of evidence, Councillor Arthur, is I need to get on, and I've tried to run the hearings as efficiently as possible. I appreciate everyone's tolerance with doing what, for me, are abnormally long days. I've tried to do that in the interest of efficiency, to try and either save both council and council taxpayers some money in running an efficient operation here, and giving, but while still under the sort of particular need to have a fair and open examination, give everyone a chance to have their say. So, it could be that we need to prolong things, but if I can get on and try and start, writing my report and my conclusions about some of the key issues, the sooner the better, really. So I intend to go and do some more site visits this afternoon, hopefully, or even late morning, and then probably next week, and then start writing up. So that's where we are on some of these documentations. Also, I had a letter from Mr. Shutt, which I've sent to the programme officer, and I've sent that to the council for the comments. I haven't looked at that, so in any detail. I've just glanced at it, but I'm going to take your comments on that first, as whether that's new evidence or new statements beyond the deadline. There was a matter came up yesterday with Vale Williams. Mr. Verster sent a statement with a position, an email with a position statement and a draft plan. That came in extremely late again, and I don't think you had a chance to see it and comment on it.
So we feel that it's basically a summary of what was discussed yesterday. There doesn't appear to be anything new here beyond what was discussed.
No, we did discuss it in brief yesterday. I'm aware of where we are with that. So, I'll accept that as a document, and that can go in the library. And I think that's all on. I need to send an email back. I'm going to send out an email, and that will be on the website as a short statement, just reiterating what I said yesterday in open session about the duty to cooperate and the letter from Montague Evans. So I'll just clarify my position. Is that I do consider. I'm still considering it's not the duty to cooperate issue with regard to soundness is certainly not academic, and I don't recall saying it in quite that way, but and that was in reference to the Mid-Sussex decision, where again we had some dispute actually as to what actually happened there, but I'll reread the letter and go back, but I just want I'll just clarify for all the participants that I'm still considering duty to cooperate issues under soundness matters, and particularly with regard to the housing numbers and what the need is, and what steps the council's taken to meet need from other authorities. And there's one other document that I'm still awaiting, as far as I'm aware. That's something that came up yesterday with regard to Mayfield and ownerships, and that was Lambs, I suppose, but Lambs were sort of in that point of view acting for the council. So I haven't seen anything. Have you aware of anything that's come through yet?
Your suggestion was that the two parties got together, wasn't it, to have an agreement over land
They were
ownership.
talking after the hearing, I noticed.
But I've not heard back from them as yet this morning.
Okay, fine.
I will follow that up with them.
Right, so I'm still awaiting that with interest to see what comes out there. Okay, does anyone else have any procedural matters to raise?
There's the submission that we gave you this morning, so from Russell Parish Council, that was a summary of our position based on the evidence that we've heard during the course of this. So pulling that evidence into our general position for your benefit. But there was one new piece of evidence.
Well, I've passed that to the council for them to check. Well, I don't know if you've had a chance to do that yet.
We literally had it just a few moments before we came
Well,
in
the
the room.
same. I just gave it as soon as I got it, so I haven't seen it. I mean, I did say a few sessions ago that I wasn't planning to go back and revisit housing matters or summary of cases on some of the other main issues today, because I knew that I would want to see the sites and hear all the other evidence before coming back, and I didn't feel that there was any need to do that. So that's why the agenda that I circulated is just really quite specific today, and particularly on infrastructure. I don't have any real questions about infrastructure. We'll come on to that in a minute.
Yeah. It's just one point, sir, on what we've presented today, that there is that one piece of new evidence, which is evidence in the public domain, which is a reference to the government's housing statement from the Housing Minister on government policy with regard to brownfield sites. And we would have presented that earlier, but the session on housing and throughout the session there's been very scant reference at any point to brownfield sites, and it's something that's actually missing noticeably from the plan itself. So there hasn't been an opportunity to present that before, so that's why we've added that piece of information in support of our earlier submissions about brownfield sites.
Well, is that in the statement that you've just sent in?
Yes, the statement says that about reiterating a point we made before about the brownfield sites, but pointing you directly to the government policy statement.
I've been away from my desk, and actually I don't normally read the Sunday Times. I do occasionally, but I gather it was in the Sunday Times, someone said yesterday. Is that right?
I haven't read the Sunday Times.
So I'm not quite sure what the status of that statement is, and whether it represents anything new in government policy, which does say that brownfield sites should be used. I mean, it was on the agenda. I mean, I don't know quite why people think I'm not taking that point into account. I mean, I didn't have any questions on it. I've seen the council's documentation about brownfield sites, and I haven't actually seen any evidence from other people that, in terms of an alternative SHLA or further detailed evidence to say that the information that the council sent isn't correct.
Well, there were a number of submissions of objection to the draft plan and to the final plan.
There were?
That highlighted brownfield sites and that have been omitted from the plan. So there was one from Russell Parish Council, there was one from North Horsham, and I believe there was reference to it in the Liberal one as well.
Well, there was reference to it, but I'm not sure what... all right, I'll make a note to go back and check those. I mean, there were assertions about brownfield sites, and I mean, I'm not aware of... Mrs. Childs, can you help me with this? Have you seen any evidence or schedules from objectors that included sites that you weren't aware of as part of your housing trajectory in, column B, part B of your policy 14?
No, we did test all the brownfield sites that were put together, and there were in our SHLA. But I was going to say to you that in our consultation statement that we put in as a submission document, we recognised that this issue was brought up, and it has been summarised in the consultation statement.
Yeah, so I've seen that and looked at it and read it, and everyone else has had a chance to comment on it. And no one said that there was, as far as I'm aware, no one disputed that wasn't accurate.
Well, yes, we certainly do, sir. And I think in our online submissions as well, we highlight the fact that the brownfield sites were sites that should have been brought forward first under government policy, and they haven't been.
Well, okay, does the council want to comment on that?
Well, yes, we believe that the HDPF has been written in accordance with the NPPF, which has a brownfield first requirement, and that's what the plan recognises. As I said, this was an issue that a number of people brought up in the consultation. They wanted us to make sure that we scrutinised brownfield sites first, and it was summarised in the consultation statement, and we're happy that it is included in policy as part of the HDPF.
So, well, my question through you, sir, to the Council is, why has all of the recent development that has been allowed and started within Horsham all been on greenfield site? And there are a number of brownfield sites that are available for development.
Well, I'm not sure that that's factually correct, that all of the recent development's been on greenfield sites. There's been quite a lot of brownfield development, hasn't there?
So I'll just point you in the direction of the authority monitoring report, which demonstrates that over the last 10 years, over 80% of development has been on brownfield, and just in the 2012-13 year, it was one of our lower figures, which was in itself 46%.
Different definition.
Well, okay, I'm not going to reopen as I said, I'm not going to reopen the housing debate. I'll check back on all the references that I've received about that, and I'll read the evidence again, and the Council's evidence about that, and the Council's schedule. If I think there's an issue there, I'll have to let the Council know. That might be in the form of a main modification. But I'll need to reconsider that. That's one. I mean, it's part of my housing. It's on my list of things to think about with regard to housing and to check the evidence that I've received. Councillor Arthur?
Yeah, just very briefly, it's true that the amount of building on greenfield sites has increased in the last 2 or 3 years, and that's because of the MPPF. We don't want to go into that. I think you understand, sir, what I'm saying. What I was going to ask you was, if you're going to look at some sites, are you actually going to be looking at brownfield sites?
No, not particularly. Why?
Well, I just thought that might answer the gentleman's question. It would show that you are interested in looking at the breakdown of sites that are available, including brownfield.
Okay, I'll check the evidence. If I think there's something, if you're saying there's a brownfield site that's available and the Council aren't, I'll check it. What I'm going to concentrate on are the main matters in dispute. And that is the numbers, and what the numbers should be, and if where that should be, and are the allocations sound, and if not, what other allocations might be needed, or if they are sound and others need to come forward, where should they be? If I think the number's too high, if I think the number's too low, I'll have to say that's, from what I've heard, it's an unlikely conclusion, Mr. Sallows. I'm sorry, but that's where I am at the moment with that.
I think you meant that the other way around, sir.
Well, no, if you think the housing need number, you're saying the housing need number's too high, aren't you? Well, if I think the numbers aren't, the number should be lower. I beg your pardon. Yeah. Okay. That's what I mean. No, I mean, I haven't got. I mean, I could spend a lot of time looking at going through the SHLA. I'm not going to go through the SHLA. I mean, I've taken quite a lot of that as read. If there's any particular disputes, then we've got a windfall allowance anyway, which basically tends to be brownfield sites more often than not. But I don't know if you've got a figure for that actually. With brownfield, whether that's been broken down, but I'll look at it. I'll look at that. So I'm not, I'm going to consider all that evidence. I've made a note here to check the brownfield position, and just to remind myself when I'm looking at all the housing figures. But it's certainly not true to say that I'm not considering it as part of my deliberations. So what I was referring to is that, the evidence of, in fact, putting it back to you then, Mr. Sallows, what do you think the plan should say?
But I think, as Rossmore Parish Council's initial submission to the original plan suggests, that the emphasis should be on fulfilling the brownfield sites first to establish the full potential for housing, and to bring all those sites forward before any greenfield development, and that the greenfield development should be done in a way as to avoid settlement coalescence.
That's you going way beyond.
The question related to what we felt, how it should change, and our feeling is that the plan as it stands now is unsound for a number of reasons, the summary of which we've presented to you today as part of our original evidence, and so the plan should be redrawn, taking into account that the potential, the full potential for brownfield, and the public outcry in terms of settlement coalescence. So those are all things that should be taken into consideration. I think that we heard a lot about localism yesterday, but there has been no localism in the production of this plan. All of the public representation has been against anything that leads to settlement coalescence.
Okay, stop, please.
Yes.
I've got to allow the council to respond to all of that now, if you want to.
So I think we've submitted to you in the consultation statement all the different stages that we have been through. We have used different techniques to try to engage with people other than the general group of individuals that normally write to us. So we've tried all sorts of techniques, such as handing out questionnaires outside railway stations, supermarkets, doing live Facebook chats. All of that is encapsulated in the consultation report. So I don't think I need to go through it in any detail here.
Okay, I'll look at all the. I'm going to look at. I'll look at the housing evidence and come to a view on that. Right. Can we get onto the agenda then? Which I think is going to be fairly a short discussion. Excuse me, I'm going to start. Well, the first question is about infrastructure needs. Mr. Cox, you've got a point, I think, you wanted to make about what the plan should say, or should the plan add anything in to plan for hospital provision. Do you want to just briefly outline your point, and then I'll ask the council to respond?
Right, thank you. A key concern, however, is the lack of a major hospital which is easily accessible to many residents in the district. Those are Horsham District Council's words, not mine. The plans for the North Horsham development originally included the provision of a new acute hospital in Horsham. This has been dropped. That would, if you referred to HDPF draft preferred strategy, which preceded the draft submission, the draft preferred strategy was in 2013. That's where I got those words from. The hospital question has been a long-running one, and I submit that the extension of Horsham will make the problem worse. At the moment, we depend on Red Hill Hospital, the hospital just outside Red Hill, for surgery, detailed examinations, and A&E. And it's a dreadful place to get to. Not so bad if you happen to have a car, but as you get older, you require more facilities from the National Health Service, and it's just at the time when you're thinking of giving up driving. To get there, many people will find they need to take 3 bus journeys, or 2 bus journeys and a train journey, and is likely to take 2 hours each way. If you are elderly, it is quite likely that your relatives and friends are elderly. And if you're an inpatient at Red Hill, then they've got a problem getting there. To put it in a nutshell, nobody wants to die lonely and a long way from home. Now, I know that Horsham District Council employees are hard-pressed, and I have a high regard for them, but there really should be a proper study of the hospital provision and other infrastructure problems before HDPF is let loose on us.
Okay, this issue was raised in the discussion of North Horsham and I think another occasion as well. Mrs. Childs or someone from the council, how do you think, could the plan provide anything else with regard to hospital provision, and how do you see that being provided or changed? Is it within your control?
Thank you, sir. Yes, as you said, we touched on it on the Land North of Horsham Day, and as we discussed there, we've had throughout the process ongoing discussions with the CCG, the Clinical Care Commissioning Group, and looking at what provision would be appropriate across the district to support new growth. The provision of a new hospital within the district isn't within their plans currently. You'll see that the Horsham District Planning Framework, specifically for Land North of Horsham, identifies that health provision would be provided, but that wouldn't be inclusive of a new hospital. And as the CCG are the infrastructure providers for that service, we are very much have to work with them and work on the plans that they are proposing.
So what are you saying to Mr. Cox, that really that if they said they wanted to build a new hospital at Horsham, or well, there is one, isn't there? But presumably it's not got A&E, has it? I gather.
Yeah, that's correct. The hospital at Horsham has a small accident emergency. It's only Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 minor injuries. Sorry.
Sorry, I was getting a bit of muttering behind me here. When's it open?
It's 9 to 5, I believe, Monday to Friday, and that's for minor injuries. Obviously, we've had discussions with the CCG, and if it were in their plan to look at the provision of a new hospital, then that would have certainly been something that we would have looked at throughout the process. However, through discussions that we've had with them, that was not the case.
Could I make
Mr.
a
Cox,
comment,
just a minute, please. Well, it's Mr. Cox's question. I'll take other comments in a minute.
It's irrelevant to Mr. Cox's question.
Okay, well, let Mr. Cox respond first. I mean,
Right.
what the council's saying.
Firstly,
it's not there. They can't force the Clinical Care Commission Group to plan for a new hospital in the district.
Firstly, I would have expected, considering the large number of people who are concerned about this in Horsham, that you would have been in detailed discussions with the National Health Service on this. I would have thought you would have been looking at possible moves like having 24-hour, 7 days a week opening for the minor injuries unit, that you would lay on provision for anyone who went to there with a complaint, if they were considered to need more help, to provide ambulance service to Red Hill. I would have expected you to rethink the question of a free bus service from Horsham Hospital to Red Hill Hospital, and I would expect that to go direct. There was a system which went off to Crawley and took forever. I would have thought you would have looked at the possibility of changing from Red Hill Hospital to Worthing Hospital, and those are just a few points off the cuff. But I don't see any of that in this document. I agree that you've got problems, but it seems to me that this plan is being damaged by compartmenting the different activities of the social services. Horsham District Council is in one box and the National Health Service is in another. I think we need joined up thinking.
Well, maybe no one in the room would dispute you, I don't think, Mr. Cox, but I mean, what I'm dealing with here is a land use plan, essentially. It's not a corporate plan for the provision of health services. That isn't what the plan can do. It can provide sites and land or ensure that there aren't any constraints on the provision of services and infrastructure. That's what we're here to sort of test in this session. But some of the things that you've mentioned there, planners are wonderful people, but they don't, they can't do, they can't influence things such as NHS budgets or NHS planning for healthcare on a sub-regional basis. Some of the things you mentioned there are, like opening the minor injuries unit. That's the plan could write something in, but it wouldn't be effective because they've got, there's no control over it from the council's point of view.
Perhaps I was being generous to the plan, and I should have just said the plan won't work because there is inadequate hospital provision.
Well, if there's... that's another way of putting it. I suppose let me ask a question then to the council. This issue's been raised, but did the Clinical Care Commissioning Group, and are they responsible for hospital provision as well as GP services? Are they responsible for everything now, are they?
Yes, that's correct.
When you said we're planning to put another 2,500 houses at North Horsham, what healthcare can they expect in the form of emergency services? What did they say to you? Did they say, well, they're still going to have to go to Red Hill, and we're not going to consider that puts it above a threshold? I've heard about the sort of time it takes to get, they have an 8-minute response time. That came up with Southwater, didn't it? So that was the other session that we dealt with it. They didn't say to you, well, you can't put these houses here because we can't service them from a clinical healthcare point of view?
No, sir, they didn't. The quote that Mr. Cox read out is indeed the council's view. They're concerned about healthcare provision. We're actively engaged with the CCG. We've spoken ourselves. We've spoken with the South East Ambulance Service. But the response is there is simply no funding to provide accident and emergency care closer to Horsham. What we are continuing our discussions with is the CCG haven't finalised what type, level and what the provision at North Horsham exactly will look like, because they are looking at their funding and looking at the wider area and what services should be provided where. So that's something which we're continuing to discuss. But the issue with accident and emergency was quite categoric in terms of there being a lack of funding.
Mrs. Haig?
Thank you, sir. The hospital in Horsham is in my ward, so that's why I asked if I could speak about it for a little bit. There are 2 wards in the hospital, one for 38-bed ward for people, mostly older people who've come in from the other hospitals because they need less care, and that's an interim step usually between being cared for at East Surrey or Worthing and going home. And the other ward is a dementia ward. Across the town, as the council has said, we are discussing the provision of GP surgeries. That's an issue generally because there's possibly going to be a new GP surgery at Broadbridge Heath to meet the Broadbridge Heath provision. And there was a suggestion that some of the town GPs would relocate out there. What we've been asking for is that alternatively we try to make better use of Horsham Hospital itself. You mentioned land issues. Alongside Horsham Hospital is the fire station. That was due to be relocated onto a site by the Highwood development, which is the Barclays development along the A24. If the fire brigade do relocate, there would be room to expand the hospital and have more healthcare provision there. We could possibly expand the ward that's used for the older people, and we could hopefully increase the minor injuries unit provision, which, as was stated, is currently only 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It is a huge concern for all of the population, because trying to get to East Surrey is very, very difficult, even by car, and we do need to do something more. So it is a planning issue, but I think the council are meeting their duty to cooperate with the CCG in dealing with that.
Well, yeah, but what else do you think the plan could do? Anything else other than it is doing?
The SPD for the Horsham Town Centre includes Hurst Road as an area of potential development. So all of the sites along there, which is...
well, that's an SPD. That isn't the planning framework.
Right. In which case, if the SPD doesn't have enough power, then some of what's in there needs to be brought into the plan to say that the healthcare provision for the town and community of Horsham, Broadbridge Heath and Southwater and North Horsham, if that goes ahead, that does need to be improved and updated, and that currently isn't addressed as well as it could be.
Well, I'm still not quite sure what... well, Mrs. Charles, do you want to comment on that? You know, could the plan do anything else to, I mean, for example, is it for this plan to say safeguard the fire station site for healthcare facilities, or would that be effective?
Thank you, sir. I mean, currently we don't have the evidence to put that in the plan or to bring that forward at the moment. If there was plans to potentially expand that hospital, then I think that they would fall under policies that we've got contained in the HDPF as existing, one specifically relating to infrastructure, inclusive communities, and also the sort of redevelopment of town centre locations as well. So I think that in terms of if a proposal was to come forward, that it would be sufficiently covered by the policies that we've got in the plan as it is at the moment.
Any other comments on this?
Can I make a point that in terms of infrastructure, it seems that the council puts more weight into rail transport than it does to healthcare provision. The plan for North Horsham includes a site allocation specifically for a railway station. They've identified that there is a need in their earlier statements for a hospital within this district. And yet they've not made any allocation for a site for that hospital to be...
So why do you think they've not done that?
Well, I don't know.
Well, you do know. You've just heard the answer.
No, their answer was that the health service group responsible for the provision of the hospital have not come forward to say that they would provide one. But that's the same is true of the rail station.
Well, okay, there's different...
but they can still make allocations.
They can, but there's an issue about the railway station which I've heard lots of evidence about. But I mean, there's issues about whether it would go there or west of Kilnwood Vale or whatever. But the only evidence I've heard from Mrs. Childs is that there's no realistic prospect whatsoever of a new hospital being provided. So if the council, they could make an allocation for a hospital at North Horsham, but it wouldn't be, it could be challenged as being ineffective planning, because if there's no prospect whatsoever, having done their duty to cooperate consultations with the health authority or the health service, and they say, well, we're not going to provide one, what else could they do?
Well, I think that the situation's changed, and once all these houses are built, the health service will understand more clearly the loading on its current provision.
Well, they know that there's going to be 2,500 houses. That was the basis of the discussion.
Well, I wasn't party to that discussion, but...
well, what are you saying? You don't believe the council did it like that?
I'm saying that there hasn't been proper account made of all of the housing that is currently underway in the Horsham district.
Well, that's okay. That's your allegation. How did the council respond to that allegation?
Perhaps I can do that. And I wouldn't want anybody to think, sir, that we just simply wrote a letter to the CCG and asked for their response. We are actively and we're continually engaged in meetings. We have regular meetings with them, both myself but also colleagues in other departments. So this is something which the council feels very strongly about. You're absolutely right in terms of land use planning. There is only so much that we can do in strategic planning and for inclusion in the HDPF, but as a council, as an authority, obviously there are other areas in which we're trying to apply pressure. But from a land use perspective, we simply don't have the evidence to support an allocation.
So I haven't got any evidence to say the plan's unsound because it doesn't cater adequately for future hospital provision. I've got no evidence to
No, sir, there's absolutely
to say that if I were to make an allocation or suggest to you that you should make an allocation, that would be effective, because it's not justified, I suppose, in that if there's no, if you've said, I have to take what's been said in good faith, the negotiations have taken place. It's outside of the planning system's control.
Can I interject there, sir? That what you just said isn't entirely true. I think Horsham Council's position is that they think there is a need for a new hospital. It's just that the health service providers don't have the funds or aren't in a position to respond to that.
Well, it's justified in that, whether it meets that test or not, maybe is a bit borderline, but it's the effectiveness test that isn't met. Councillor Arthur?
Yeah, I was actually involved in a review it was called the North Eastern Review on the Hospital Provision, and I think you'll find, sir, that unless there's a catchment area of about 350,000, that the NHS will not provide a new hospital. Well, we're a long way off that. So really, it's all about what you do, to fill the gap in the meantime, because there are, as the gentleman on my left said, there are problems when people have to get access to medical facilities. But what this plan would be doing, and I confirm that there have been regular meetings with the CCG. I've been to some of them. The obvious things to do are to improve the transport for people, find some way of improving the accessibility to the hospital, but also look at the ambulance response times. Now, this is where this plan does have an impact. The transport studies in particular, if there is going to be congestion on the roads, then the ambulance response times could increase to the point where fatality rates increase. Now, to me, that is something for the transport study. So you've got the transport study, one impact, another one is the accessibility, and the third one is the ambulance response times. I think those are the areas that I would have expected the CCG to come back with a statement and say, we are doing the following. I haven't seen that statement.
Sorry, that you expect them to come in with a statement saying what?
Well, saying we're doing this in relation to ambulance response times. I know they are doing things with ambulance response times, but I think that the members...
What are they doing?
Well, I'll give you an example. They're putting the ambulance...
Putting in helicopters?
Well, and helicopters, but they're distributing...
It's probably the answer, isn't it?
Well, one answer, but if the ambulances weren't in one place, they might stand a better chance of getting to a diverse district, parts of the district in a reasonable time. Right. So they're distributing the ambulances. So I know they are taking action, but I think the public have got every right to expect that when this plan is put forward, that kind of information is in the plan.
Oh. Well.
It's just the public idea of it.
Well, I think government guidance is that it shouldn't be in the plan, that sort of information, from what I can get from my reading of it. That's what... If the CCCG said we don't agree, I have not seen an objection from them, for example, say, to the North Horsham site, on grounds that it's going to slow down traffic on the A264 and therefore ambulance response times are going to increase by a minute or 2 minutes or whatever. It might be. That possibly would be a factor to be taken into account. But I haven't seen that.
I'd be surprised if the CCG has seen the output from the traffic studies.
Well, they might. I don't know. But anyway, does the council want to comment on this?
Yes, thank you. Through our discussions with the CCG, we have discussed the plan in detail. They are fully aware of where development will be, what the main issues are, and you'll see from the consultation on the plan that there was no objection from the CCG, and that in terms of provision for land north of Horsham, they are happy with the reference made to health and community facilities.
Dr. Smith?
Sir, just to reinforce a point made by Mr. Cox, last year the Chief Executive of Surrey and Sussex Healthcare NHS Trust, and that runs the East Surrey Hospital, apparently, according to the West Sussex County Times, September 13, they told Horsham District Councillors that there's a tremendous pressure on acute providers because the way in which demography is changing, and crucially, we have not prepared for the demographic changes that we are having to face. That's the problem. That I do think is something that does need to be addressed. And I do understand the points that you've made about the role of planning. A question for...
Well, hang on a minute. So that's what they sent to the newspaper. So when was that?
That was September last year.
Okay. Well, when was your latest discussion with them?
I can't give you an exact date, but during the preparation of the plan, so it's certainly have been this year that we've had discussions, and we certainly wouldn't take any evidence from what's read in the local newspaper either.
Sorry?
We wouldn't take note of the evidence in the local newspaper either, sir. So discussions happened probably in about springtime this year with the CCG. And in terms of the provision, our colleagues in leisure services also have ongoing discussions about the general provision of health services across the district and how that's provided as well. So there's continuous discussions and correspondence that we have with them that's continually ongoing.
I mean, yeah, obviously demographic changes will affect healthcare, but then presumably they would have seen your projected demographic change as a result of the North Horsham development and the West of Southwater development and the other housing in your discussions. I mean, they would have had to, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they're aware of all of the locations where housing and development generally is going to be located and spread across the district, and indeed the two strategic sites as well.
Yes, sir, may I ask through you, in these discussions, were the CCG representatives asked specific questions concerning these are the anticipated effects on road traffic, this is where we are now, this is where we might be with congestion, what effects will that have on ambulance response times? Also, another question that comes to mind is a risk assessment. Have the CCG been asked to provide anticipated mortality rates in consequence of the lack of local acute hospital? That would be very useful to have, and that's quite reasonable in any planning scenario where people's lives are at risk. And I've had some experience, but in a totally different context of this, then you do look at what the casualty rates might be and the consequences of a chosen course of action. Thank you.
Well, do the council want to comment on that? Is there anything further to add on these discussions?
No, sir, I don't think we have anything further to add. Thank you.
I mean, it's their responsibility, isn't it, to provide healthcare. Mr. Moore?
Yes, if I could just make two very quick points. First of all, I think that unfortunately the hospital provision in Horsham is a red herring, because the position that we've been told is they will not build one. There aren't the staff to cover it. My concern is on primary care, so surgeries and GPs. And I think that is where I perceive one of the weaknesses in the plan, that it's easy enough to say we'll assign a bit of land for healthcare, but where the doctor's going to come from, we know our existing surgeries are at maximum capacity, and that, I think, has to be taken into account when you're looking at where you're going to put houses.
Okay, does the council want to comment on that with regard to primary care? Presume you had the same sort of discussions. And
Yes.
it's not, I mean, my understanding of the funding of that is not, it's for the health service to fund. If somehow or other it's quite complicated, as some of you overheard, I think my wife was a GP. She's retired, but I know what happens when you build a new surgery, actually, and the sort of funding arrangements for that are sort of complicated. But actually, it's not something that one would expect developers to provide as part of a sort of Section 106 agreement, other than possibly in providing land or making a requirement to provide land.
And possibly service land, sir, yes, but certainly in terms of the provision of the land. Yeah, as I say, the CCG are compiling their plans for the future for this area in terms of where precisely the facilities will go. And you've heard some of the debates that have been had already from others. From our perspective, we have an ongoing dialogue so that we can ensure we have land that is the right size but also in the right location. And I feel that, in terms of a land use plan, that's as far as we are able to go. That doesn't mean to say that the council doesn't have strong views about healthcare provision and works, very, very hard to try and get the best it possibly can for its residents. But in terms of the land allocation, that's the process that we have been through.
Yeah, so it's, for example, a policy requirement in the North Horsham proposed allocation to provide land for the provision of healthcare.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, Mr. Cox.
I would like to thank you for considering my concern and discussing it at length. I think out of the discussion it's been highlighted that there are already many people who are concerned about this and that the situation is going to get worse. It seems to me the conclusion at the moment is that the problem is intractable, and I would like to think that this might find its way into your report somewhere, sir.
It might find its way in. Not that sentence. I will assess whether the plan does what it needs to do in a land use planning framework and within my remit to meet infrastructure needs adequately, and whether it's sound in that respect. Following on from my question 41. That's what I consider my role to be. That isn't necessarily, I think, what you think my role ought to be, or whether it ought to have some other wider influence. But I can't go beyond what my statutory responsibilities are. Okay. So I will, see. That's one of the things. The other, I think, issue that people wanted, Mrs. White, is it on healthcare or is it on another type of infrastructure?
Yes,
you are Mrs. White, yes?
Yes.
You're looking at your name. I'm sure I've got you right, yes?
Hi. No, just as an afterthought, I mean, after all this talk about the need for a hospital and so on, and we're putting all these 2,500 houses on one site, doesn't this again tell you logically that if we spread the development across the whole district as per the alternative strategy put forward by certain councillors, that would that would obviate the need for an extra hospital somewhere. For example, people, if it was spread more evenly across the district, people could go perhaps to Worthing Hospital instead of everybody having to go to East Surrey Hospital. Doctors' surgeries are spread around. I know for a fact that the doctors...
they're a different... I think they're a different issue, because it's a bit like sort of discussing primary and secondary education provision, isn't it? At a higher... say, for example, the hospitals are secondary education, the GPs are the primary, so you've got a lower level, primary care level, which is more dispersed, and actually that would, in the way that primary schools follow development, and there's a sort of certain catchment size for them, then GPs would follow the same. With regard to the hospitals, yes, I suppose it wasn't argued yesterday, but maybe it could have been by Mayfield's, that their Mayfield's new Market Town proposal in the south of the district might have a shorter response time to the nearest hospital. Presumably, is that Brighton? There must be one in Brighton, isn't there? But I don't know, or Worthing. But I don't know how long it would take to get there, and what transport services are to those. We looked at that in some detail. That they're going to, the proposal is for new buses and whatever, but and links to a park and ride. That's a factor. Any comments on that?
So,
I don't think there is, though. I'm not sure quite how much further we can take this point. We are obviously actively looking at how services might be expanded at Horsham Hospital. Liberty produced a leaflet under their own, completely their own leaflet that the council wasn't involved with that, which stated that they had land that could be made available for a hospital if it were needed at any future point. But as I say, we haven't included that in the plan because we do not have the evidence for it.
Okay. Well, the issue of dispersing developments before me, and I'll that's one of the factors I could take into account.
If it helps at all, I have personal experience. I ride emergency blood to the hospitals in the district, and riding on a fully marked up motorcycle. The worst part of the district is the A264 between Crawley and Horsham. If there was a site down, because we go down the A23 to Brighton Hospital, that road is probably the fastest response, especially after the work that's recently been done on it. So in terms of response times for ambulances and things to East Surrey Hospital, then the best location would be along the A23. And certainly the worst part of any response time is the A264 between Crawley and Horsham. That's from personal experience on a marked up emergency vehicle.
I presume it takes longer to go from Southwater.
Yes. Yeah. So
in some ways you can argue
the response.
North Horsham's the best location for access to the hospital, unless you were possibly one of the west of Crawley sites.
Yeah. But anywhere to the northwest of Horsham, for getting to East Surrey, which is the major emergency hospital, is the worst part of the district. And if you were looking for
how
putting
can it be worse than somewhere that's further away where you've still got to get to there to get to East
Your
Surrey?
points are about the Mayfield proposal, and certainly any development along the A23 gives a much faster response time to East Surrey Hospital.
What, from Henfield?
Yeah.
What, yeah. You're telling me it takes longer to get from Henfield, or
no, I'm saying that
south of
if you were looking. So your question about
you're telling me it takes longer to get from Hickstead
No, I'm saying it's faster to get anywhere along the A23.
It does from North Horsham.
Anywhere along the A23 is faster than from anywhere to the north or west of Horsham to get to East Surrey Hospital.
What, the A23 goes to Brighton?
The A23 goes north as well to East Surrey Hospital. The A23 runs north to East Surrey. That's
if you want, I'll try and test it, but I can't. I just can't believe you, Mr. Sallows. How can it take longer? How can it be quicker to get to Red Hill from Hickstead than from North Horsham?
In an emergency,
is that what you're really telling me?
That's what I'm telling you. So in an emergency vehicle with blue lights, that journey is faster than it is from going from the west or north of Horsham. That's what I have to time my journeys. I could actually bring in some logs if it helped, but. If you like, you can drive it in a car as well, and you'll see that if you're on the A23, then it's much faster.
I will. Believe me, I'm just writing a note to say do it.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got a full motorbike licence, but I haven't got a motorbike at the moment. And I suppose I'll have to obey the speed limits. Well, you presumably don't.
It's a moot point, so that we are trained in what we do, and as for the other emergency vehicles, we do obey the laws of the road and we do obey the speed limits. There is a degree of leeway where it is deemed safe to do so, but generally, yes, we have to obey the speed limits, the same as the emergency vehicle.
I'm not going to comment about my own driving behaviour. Okay. Cycles. I mean, yeah. Were you raising something about cycles or healthcare or response times?
Just a very small point of clarification.
On a bike, I'm sure.
Yes, on the ambulance, that's to say that, of course, if you're in Southwater and you have to go to the hospital, you're very likely to be taken down to Worthing, not round to Red Hill.
Yeah. Well, that's the point that's been raised by Mrs. White about dispersal of development, which I'll take into account. Right, okay. Have you finished? I see your board's still up, Dr. Smith.
Just one quick point. Quoting from the ministerial foreword to the MPPF, sustainable means ensuring that better lives for ourselves don't mean worse lives for future generations. So I would suggest that inadequate provision for medical and health care for an increasing population, which is what we're facing, will mean worse lives, not only for future generations, but also for communities in the present, sir.
Well, I'm sure that might well be right, but that still doesn't address what that was said in a much wider context than healthcare provision, and it still doesn't say what the plan should do to provide for better healthcare.
Just one query on that, and I'm not disputing anything that's been said by either yourself or other councils so far, but we are planning to 2031, and it may well be, as we've been told, that CCG don't have funding to provide what is considered to be necessary, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's always going to be the case. It might be that some years hence that funding could be obtained and will be obtainable, and therefore would it be sensible to make some provision for the need of a hospital in the plan? Just reinforcing points that have already been made.
Do you want to comment on that?
No, sir. I think it goes back to the point that there's flexibility in the policies for infrastructure, supporting healthy communities that would probably cover any proposals in the future.
And presumably they did take into account the plan's proposals up to 2031.
Yes,
in their planning.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Sallows, I was going to go on to the cyclists. What's your...
Just one point in relation to that you were suggesting that there was no suggestion as to how the plan would change to alleviate the effects on healthcare, and I would suggest that there are a number of alternative proposals that were put to this plan, all of which provide a better distribution of housing in terms of healthcare provision.
With regard to what? Just hospital access or GPs?
To both, in terms of certainly the Liberal Democrat proposal to distribute it around the current settlements would work much better in terms of GP provision.
Why?
Because there's existing GP provision that exists in those areas that would only need expansion to cover the additional things. Whereas here we're looking at an area where you'd have to provide that as part of the new development.
So why is that not as good?
It's not as good in terms of the immediate delivery, and in terms of the focus of the focus, as I understand it, with regard to healthcare, is to provide better expertise in condensed centres. So towards having larger GP practices that have a wider range of specialisations within the doctors that apply there, and that would encourage the growth of existing ones.
Does the council agree with that? Healthcare provision is going to be better if the settlement pattern was dispersed rather than having a new provision of services in a new surgery in North Horsham.
Sorry, what my colleague was just reminding me was the content of the sustainability appraisal, which looked at the dispersal strategy and concluded that when people are in a dispersed situation, there are people that actually have difficulty of access to surgeries, so that it has concluded that it is better to locate development close to larger settlements that have services and facilities.
I think some of the proposals actually were suggesting putting them close to those settlements that exist already. But I think more importantly, in regard to the hospital provision, the provision and access to hospitals in the south is much better than it is in the north. So the access to Worthing and Brighton is much better than it is to East Surrey from the locations that have been provided in the plan.
Okay, so what are you suggesting then? I haven't seen numbers. I looked at this plan, the Lib Dems plan, but I didn't see a sort of an allocation of numbers to settlements, did I, in it?
There are allocations to settlements in there.
Okay, better check that. But are you allocating the same number of dwellings?
The overall total is the same as the HDPF. I'm just trying to find the page for our settlement hierarchy.
I haven't got it out in front of me, but I'll take the reference. Just give me a few numbers, say, for Pulborough, Billingshurst, Storrington.
Pulborough we had 600 across the 20-year period, Storrington 600, Ashington 120, Christ Hospital 60, and smaller villages, unclassified settlements, we expected 20 across the 20-year period.
So what was the total for smaller settlements?
Sorry?
What was the total for smaller settlements?
We had 1,500 in the main town, 4,600 in the small towns and larger villages, 1,080 in the medium villages, 300 in the smaller villages, and 520 in the unclassified settlements. And that's on page 13 and 14 of our strategy.
Do you want any comment on that from the council? would that be materially a different dispersal? I mean, I suppose 600 in Pulborough and 600 in Storrington would. That would be a slight shift. Or a shift.
Yes, sir. I mean, what I was just searching through was I was looking at the number of permissions that have been given across the district and some of those rural areas to just be able to illustrate how those southern settlements are actually taking quite significant permissions. If I just give Storrington as an example, it was 218, so not the 600 that was 500 that was identified in the alternative strategy, but nevertheless, Pulborough, Henfield, has taken 498. You know, there are a number of sort of quite large numbers of units that have come forward in our more rural settlements. But the settlement hierarchy, which we talked about in the early part of our examination hearing sessions, obviously looks at what sort of scale of development might be appropriate. So we talked about, you know, a step change from one category categorisation into another, and a dispersal strategy, in the council's view, is that it applies pressure across the district, and whilst villages can accommodate organic growth, and it's quite right that they should be planned for through neighbourhood planning, that it is then difficult when to address the cumulative impact of such development, which is something which, in terms of strategic development, it is much easier to be able to address those sort of key issues. But we accept that the settlements right across the district need organic growth in order for them to remain vibrant.
Well, yeah, but so your proposal is 1,500 through neighbourhood plans. Okay, I'll go back and check that. I did want to deal with cycling, just so I know. I've not had any other statements from anyone about infrastructure provision. Does anyone have any other infrastructure issues to raise? I just want to know. Okay, just tell me, Councillor Arthur, what's your issue?
It's about transport studies.
Okay. Anyone else? Mrs. Haig, what's your issue?
It's about where people work relative to where they live and the infrastructure that's needed to support that.
Okay, we'll take a short break then for 10 minutes until 25 to 12, and then I'll come back. I'll start with the cyclists with Ms. Fletcher, and then we'll deal with those two other points before we close. Okay, can we continue, please, with let's deal with the points from the cycling group, please. You didn't set another statement, but in your representation, you've said that there needs to be more in the plan for cyclist provision. Were you thinking about the sites, or would you like to just sort of explain your representation in a bit more detail?
Give you a brief outline of what we want to say. We believe that this planning framework examination could be really critical for the future of cycling in Horsham. So I'm really glad that we've got the opportunity to come and speak. In outline, the case that we have is that the planning framework is unsound with respect to cycling on all 4 criteria. It's not positively prepared, it's not justified, it's not effective, it's not consistent with national policy. And the impact of this is falls into 3 main categories. Firstly, this means that the planning framework is not going to be an effective working document that will enable the council to meet its NPPF requirements on cycling when it deals with all future planning applications, and that will include the current West of Worthing Road one and the North Horsham one. Nor will it be adequate to meet the needs when there are pre-application discussions for proposed developments. So that's its role as a working document. It will be completely crippled, we believe. Secondly, we believe that the planning framework hasn't adequately assessed cycling infrastructure needs, and that means that the North Horsham site in particular has been over-favourably assessed. Thirdly, we have a serious concern that the necessary infrastructure is not going to be covered by the funding and may not be delivered. And I've got evidence to justify my points for all those things, and we will be putting forward 3 proposals towards making the planning framework sound.
Well, you should have done that already.
Well, the stuff within the... I mean, I don't know how I can do it. We responded to the to the framework.
Well, you would have had a chance to... I mean, OK, as I said, what I'm interested in is what do you think needs to be done to make the plan sound?
We'll tell you that.
Well, you should have told the council already, because it's a bit difficult to expect them to just respond on the hoof, if you like. But let's see how we go.
In our representation to the planning framework, we made suggestions. I've contacted Claire Vickers again recently to discuss this, and she said to wait until after the planning framework examination was over.
Who's she?
I've forgotten her exact title, sorry.
Chairman of the Strategic Planning.
Councillor Vickers, sorry.
Yes.
Well, then, if you want something changed in the framework, in the planning framework itself, then it needs to be put forward for me to look at. So it needs to be done now.
Well, can we?
I've got your I've got your representation here. There's a page of things on it, but what I'm looking for is
we suggested that
what
the
it
council
says that
should
the
develop
plan should say.
A planning document specifically on cycling. And that's in our original representation.
And what would be the status of that document?
I imagine it would be a supplementary planning document.
OK. But you're now saying that you want something changed in the HDPF. Is that right?
Right. Yes, because we were looking to have... right. We're proposing that the council should be required to develop a supplementary planning document or whatever legal status of document is appropriate, and as a layperson, I obviously don't know that, on cycling policy that will enable the council to meet NPPF requirements. And we have a list of the types of things that they will need to include in that in order to achieve that. We are also proposing we are making the case that the council should be required to undertake an exercise to identify, assess and guarantee provision of the cycling infrastructure needed for the strategic sites, and where appropriate the alternative sites to meet the NPPF. So that would be for your judgment as to whether you were convinced by our evidence.
Okay, well, let's deal with that first as one. Well, I suppose we should deal with the overview, really.
Yeah.
In terms of what, I'm not clear what sort of the site-specific allocations, I think, do require some cycle measures.
Perhaps if I could explain start with looking at why we're saying that the plan has not been positively prepared, because that influences what provision the council is making on the strategic sites.
So, would you just like me to give an overview of what the policies do contain?
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Well, that might help, and then we can go into a wider discussion of why they might not be adequate. We can have a discussion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, Policy 39 is looked at sustainable transport. So that looks at all modes of sustainable transport, including the provision of cycling. This policy has been prepared in accordance with the NPPF, specifically the transport section and the infrastructure paragraph 162, to ensure that we provide appropriate facilities within the plan for cycling. Criteria B and F specifically relate to the provision of cycling. It seeks to ensure that improvements to existing transport systems are integrated, and also looks at ways to minimise the distance people travel and conflicts between traffic, cyclists and pedestrians. Also, criteria I looks at cycling as well and promotes safe and suitable access for cyclists within development proposals. In addition to the general policy, we have got policy SD8, which is one of the Land North of Horsham policies. That has specific mentions to pedestrian and cycle, and that is the first bullet point of that policy there. So in both, the plan generally makes provision for access to cycling facility and emphasises that that is important and a priority to increase sustainable transport modes. And when we have looked at specific sites, we have taken account of the provision for cycling and safe cycle routes through the strategic allocation policies as well.
There certainly is a policy on sustainable transport. I'm arguing that at this point I'm arguing that the framework wasn't positively prepared. When the framework went up for consultation had been completed, the evidence base on cycling was almost entirely absent, and I'd maintain it's not possible to prepare a policy positively without an evidence base. The main part of the evidence base was the Horsham District Transport and Development Study, and in 127 pages, the single reference to cycling was under assessment criteria, where it says, "Are there any quick wins to improve nearby existing footways, cycleways, footbridges, etc.? Is the cost and deliverability of such improvements likely to be prohibitive?" Which is obviously a long way short from the NPPF, which says planning must be a creative exercise in finding ways to enhance and improve the places where we live, give priority to pedestrian and cycle movements, create safe and secure layouts, and the transport system needs to be balanced in favour of sustainable transport modes. And in support of that, that's not just a throwaway comment in the NPPF, it's something that's currently being re-emphasised by the government. The Secretary of State for Transport said, "We've got to, in future, cycle-proof all road developments." That's in reference to Ambition for Cycling 2013. And the HM government response to the Get Britain Cycling Inquiry in 2013 was, "The Department of Transport expects local authorities to up their game," not continue, but to up their game in delivering infrastructure that takes cycling into account from the design stage. So the evidence base was essentially absent, but not only that,
What sort of evidence base are you talking about?
the evidence base for what cycling needs were, and ways that they could, information that they could use in order to meet the extracts I've just talked about actively managing, giving priority, giving people a real choice about how they travel and so on. So the evidence base they looked at was extraordinarily narrow and had very, very little reference within it, and certainly was extremely lacking in detail. There was a little more in the Horsham District Infrastructure Study, which predated the change of policy towards North Horsham. And I could talk about that, but there's not much in there and it's not very specific. However, there is a lot of relevant information both within Horsham and West Sussex and in the public domain on cycling that was ignored in the evidence base and has not been used in preparing the policy. The Horsham Cycle Review of 2009 has belatedly been mentioned in the SIL document, but we were told by the officer that they hadn't yet looked at it. So that couldn't have been used to prepare the planning framework. Now, you might question whether this document is an important one or not. It was presented in 2009 to Horsham Cabinet.
Sorry, what's the name of the document again?
The Horsham Cycle Review, so it is now on the website, 2009.
Well, has it got a core document number?
It's a secondary document, I think.
We're just double checking it's got a core document number, but with reference to the cycling strategy and that it wasn't incorporated in the infrastructure delivery plan, if you look at infrastructure delivery plan core document reference CD IN02, it looks at the evidence. There's a list of the evidence-based documents that were included in that, and fourth down includes the Horsham Cycling Review within that, and then going back to the core document list, both the Horsham Cycling Review and the South Water Cycling Review are secondary studies, and their core documents CDSS31 and CDSS32. So they've been considered in both the preparation of the HCPF and the infrastructure delivery plan.
I'm not disputing that it's in the infrastructure delivery plan. I would be surprised to hear any evidence from the Council it was genuinely considered in the planning framework preparation. I know that we mentioned it in our responses, and our information was that the reason it had appeared in the later documents, the SIL documents, was because of our comments. May not have been true. There's no evidence, nonetheless, whether or not it was included, that it was seriously considered. I'll come on to it in a minute, but I was just going to explain that this is an important document that was presented and agreed by Cabinet in 2009. And at that stage, the Council agreed that this was a valuable evidence-based and focused piece of work to contribute to the overall infrastructure planning required as part of the core strategy review. It incorporated the most recent and what was considered to be the best practice in the assessment of cycling. The Council considered what other courses of action that they could have taken but rejected, and said if they'd failed to use this document or get this document, they would have failed to respond to the recommendations of the HDCP and the Scrutiny and Overview Committee Cycling Working Group, and made it more difficult for the Council to comply with national policy and the objectives of the local transport plan. So my argument is that there isn't really any evidence that the key issues in this document and some of the other ones I want to go on to have been given due regard in the planning of the framework. Because...
Well, I think can we try and cut short this, or move it on, and not cut it short, get to the sort of gist of what key changes do you think the plan, the HDPF, needs to make? What are you seeking in it? Are you seeking a sort of proposal for a, cycle network in the district? Or, I mean, some of the things that you've included in the bottom of your representation are things that could be said to be covered by the policies that the council have just mentioned. But, I mean, I'm not sure, I'm still unsure as to how you think the document, what's missing in the document. Right.
The core policy, whatever it's called, policy number 39, is actually not. It's not very precise, and it's not very strong. It says that the council will support development if it meets these criteria, but it has nothing whatsoever that indicates that the council will not support development that does not meet those criteria. The criteria themselves are fairly broad brush. Now, in itself, that would not matter, except that that is the only document that we have to rely on when we're dealing with planning applications and guiding the developers in what the expectations are of cycling from their developments.
Well, hang on, is that correct?
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I think we should go back to the sort of detailed points that have been made, and just to emphasise that this is a strategic plan. We are of the view that Policy 39, Sustainable Transport, has been prepared in accordance with national policy, in particular paragraph 35 of the NPPF. The policy is to be flexible enough for the determination of planning applications. In terms
Is there anything else that you would use to determine planning applications?
In terms of the specific design, if you look at Policy 32, bullet point 5, that looks at the specific design of cycle paths and how that should promote sustainable forms of transport as well. So I think that we would consider that the...
So that's going to be your main... what's in place at the moment, your main development control policy? I mean, I know there's a core strategy at the moment, but is there...
Sorry, sir.
Presumably some of the sites that have been developed were subject to SP. There'll be something in the Joint Area Action Plan.
I might be able to help there. That when we look at some planning applications and we try to make sure that they have some consideration of cycling infrastructure to meet NPPF, where we find anything to quote from Horsham, it's policy CP19 and DC40 that are the closest. They're very similar to policy 39, although they actually are, I would argue, are slightly stronger in that they talk about priority will be given and development should be, rather than merely saying development will be supported if, with nothing to say about what happens if development is not.
So it is indeed policy DC40 of the General Development Control Policies. There are two specific criteria which relate to cycling. That's criteria C, which states it is...
And is that going to stay in place?
No.
So this is going to supersede those policies?
Is. So the two criteria, I think our view would be that in terms of the new plan, that has been positively prepared in line with the NPPF. The existing policy doesn't allow for any greater firmed up proposals for when applications are submitted. It doesn't say that developments have to. Again, that is still flexible in the approach that it takes for when planning applications are submitted. And again, I think just go back to that policy 39 was has been prepared in accordance with the NPPF and in particular paragraph 35.
As far as positive preparation is concerned, I'd also like to point out some of the evidence that I think, particularly in the light of requirements for councils to up their game, some of the evidence that I think should have played a very large part in consideration of what cycling measures are needed.
Unless you're, what are you saying that that I should just say that stop the examination and say that the plan is completely unsound because it doesn't deal with cycling properly, or are you saying that you want me to look at the wording of policy 39 to make it more restrictive, are you saying you want some other measures in the plan?
As a lay person, I didn't expect to have to come up with the exact legal instrument to deal with this problem, which may be my misunderstanding. What I'm expecting you to find is that the plan is not sound with respect to cycling, and that it can be made sound with respect to cycling by requiring Horsham District Council to develop some form of supplementary planning document, and that may not be the correct legal term, that...
Well, it might... No, well, it could well be, but
that deals with the gaps that are present.
But that wouldn't necessarily help you if you were monitoring planning applications to put forward your views about what cycling provision should be made within those planning application sites.
I think it would help enormously.
Well, no, hang on, I hadn't quite finished. In terms of a development plan policy for trying to back up refusal of a development because it didn't meet an approved development plan policy with regard to cycle provision. So if there's nothing else, because if it's just supplementary planning guidance, that wouldn't necessarily be sufficient. So I would suggest to you that you do want the weight of some development plan policy that's been through public examination such as this, which can then be a hook to provide further guidance if you want to flesh out the broad principles that this document states, that it requires proper cycle provision to be made in new developments and to encourage the provision of more cycling and better facilities and safer facilities for cyclists, both in new developments and possibly on existing routes. But then you need, well, okay, but I don't think you want just me to sort of strike out all references to cycling in this, do you?
I absolutely don't. No, I want the council to have their policy. When I read the wording of policy 39, that gives me less power, if you like, to object to a developer's proposal than the wording that's directly in the NPPF. Whereas the policy that the council is producing is required not just to echo what the NPPF says, but to actually make sure that the NPPF is implemented, it goes on to one of our further points about the lack of effectiveness of the policy, the framework as it exists.
Okay, have you got any suggested wording for me? You haven't written it in your representation.
Can I make a point here, please? We support the cyclists with their requests for extra infrastructure for cycling. We also agreed that policy 39 wasn't sufficiently strong enough, and our policy 44, we were trying to strengthen the requirements for cycling and pedestrians to be considered before vehicles. I should add we hadn't agreed that with the cyclists, and they may want to refine it, but we did take, we were taking their views into account.
Okay, just a minute. Well, you've said development will be required to support the objectives of the West Sussex Local Transport Plan, which are, and then reduces all of those. There must be a cycling one in there somewhere.
There is some cycling evidence in the LTP.
And then you've said, okay, development will only be permitted where? So you're seeking a change in the wording of the policy and sustainable location, and then I think these look fairly similar. But is that right, Mrs. Hay?
Some of it is similar, some of it is trying to strengthen the wording to overcome this issue of could or maybe, but it should be provided.
Yeah, all right, just checking the cycle ones. Well, the cycle ones aren't different, are they?
Well, in order to, I could suggest that in order to meet the ideally, I'd expected that you would be able to make a recommendation that the council went away and came up with a policy that did this. But it would be stronger if not only the council developed a policy, and maybe you don't have the power to make them develop a policy on this.
Well, I do. I can suggest a main modification to change the policy if I think it is a main modification.
I think that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, so I'm asking you.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking you, what do you think the policy should say?
Right. I don't have.
Do you agree with the Lib Dems policy?
We've spent some time coming up with the beginnings of a draft cycling policy here, but this is a draft document. It takes a lot of effort to do. It would obviously need full consultation. There's obviously a degree of political decision making involved in it. So I can't ask you to put that as it stands into the planning framework. What I could say is that the wording that's in the National Policy Planning Framework itself is in some respects actually more useful than the wording in Policy 39, which says planning should actively manage patterns of growth to make the fullest possible use of cycling. The transport system needs to be balanced, and we'd like to see it saying rebalanced, which is in line with the latest government statement and I forget which local document, LTP3 I think, I've forgotten, rebalanced in favour of sustainable transport modes, giving people a real choice about how they travel. I'd like it to see plans and decisions should take account of whether the opportunities for sustainable transport modes have been taken up. Developments that generate significant movement should be located where the need to travel will be minimised and the use of sustainable transport modes can be maximised. Developments should be located and designed where practical to give priority to pedestrian and cycle movements. I carry on, but as you see, I'm just reading the National Policy Planning Framework because it is actually more powerful than Policy 39. Okay.
Let's deal with that policy framework. I've got the point. How do the council respond to that?
Thank you, sir. I think firstly that we would consider that Policy 39 is in accordance with that section of the MPPF. Also, in terms of what's just been read out, that directly comes from the MPPF, and we shouldn't be repeating national guidance in our plan, which is why we haven't done so. And obviously that in any planning applications, the MPPF is indeed a material consideration, so these criteria would be taken into account in any planning applications as they are when they are submitted.
Sorry to interrupt there. That's an interesting point, though, isn't it? But actually the MPPF is is a material consideration. It's not the development plan, and planning application decisions are made in accordance with the development plan still and the legal framework, which I think leaves a bit of the old mantra, if you like, that inspectors used to trot out about not repeating national policy in local documents. I don't think holds quite as much force as it used to do, because we've still got the development plan taking primacy here. So I don't think my colleagues and I sort of actually take quite such a tough line on that as we used to do. And I can't. What about this point that the wording you've got is less tough than the NPPF wording? Do you agree with that point?
I think if I take you to paragraph 35 of the NPPF and the bullet points there, the last part of that first bit suggests that this, in terms of design, it says where practical, and our policy is will encouraged and supported, and I think that we would consider that actually that's probably slightly stronger than what is set out in the NPPF. And obviously our policies can't require cycle schemes as part of the development. We should be encouraging them and supporting them.
Okay, any comments on that?
I'd like to still re-emphasise the point that this is all very broad brush and high-level stuff, and is not actually looking at the detail of what the situation and the priorities on the ground are.
Well, hang on. I don't want to. I mean, that's what this document is. It's a planning framework.
Yes, but I mean, it's looking at framework. It's looking at things like, should we be in North Horsham or South Water or villages?
Yeah, but it's also providing a broad development control framework. But then clearly, we're going to come on to North Horsham if you want. It's then setting only in strategic sites is it setting other criteria, more local criteria, to be taken into account in the development of those
strategic sites. Well, the sorts of criteria I'd be interested in is, in LTP3, it says that the current provision of cycling facilities throughout the district, and in particular within Horsham, are not sufficient to support and maintain sustainable travel.
Whose document's that?
That's LTP3. I'm afraid I don't have a page reference.
Well, it's not, is that a West Sussex document?
Yes, that's the local transport plan for West Sussex County Council.
Okay, so that's...
And the evidence, this is also emphasised in various places within the Horsham Cycle Review, the South Water Cycle Network Review, and the Horsham District Community Partnership Transport Plan of 2005. All these documents emphasise the missing low-quality and fragmented cycle facilities, and how cycling facilities locally are suppressed due to lack of facilities and fear. The LTP undertook a household survey where...
Okay, all right. You don't need to quote it in detail. So, what are you saying the plan should... Are you saying the plan should do, the HDPF should do anything else?
It should...
What you're saying, the broad policies you think you'd like should be reworded to be a bit more strongly worded. They're the development control framework, the overarching development control framework, and then
I'd like a detailed policy which is a detailed working document that will enable case by case on new development, maintenance, and on planning applications that will enable the sustainable transport requirements of NPPF to be met.
So you want me to write into have I got this right? You think that I should recommend that the council write into the policy a commitment to producing a supplementary planning document, an SPD, on cycling.
Unless somebody can advise me a better way of doing it, yes, I do.
Which would implement the principles of that.
And be taking into account current and evolving best practice, because it's a very rapidly moving field at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. How does the council respond to that?
Thank you, sir. I think that in this instance an SPD wouldn't be appropriate. In terms of the policy, again, going back to this, it's a strategic plan, and we consider that the criteria set out in policy 36-39 sufficiently cover the issues of cycling, both in ensuring that existing links and networks are safeguarded and looking at proposals in the future that they are fully addressed and provide provision for cycling. In terms of looking at cycling in more detail, there is the Horsham and Southwater cycling review, and that potentially may be more of an opportunity to look at more detailed linkages. But I think in terms of the strategic plan, that a supplementary planning document wouldn't be appropriate.
Wouldn't be appropriate?
Yeah, would not.
Well, why wouldn't it be appropriate to delegate more detailed matters to a supplementary planning document?
Well, I think part of more detail is covered in the strategic sites as well anyway, which will pick up a number of the new cycle routes for development coming forward. And I think that, again, our view is that it's sufficiently covered.
Well, I'm going to come on to sites in a minute, but...
again, it's sufficiently covered by Policy 39.
I clearly disagree. I've got a lot of evidence as to why the existing core documents are falling short of meeting, core document strategies are falling short of meeting current NPPF requirements, and the planning framework as it stands is not going to change that situation. And again, we're looking for councils to up their game, in the words of...
Well, yeah, but that's a nice phrase, but how?
I mean, it depends how long you've got to talk about it, really.
No, I just want a few... Well, I've got another half hour, maybe. No, I mean, I'm not going to cut you off. But I'm looking for a bit more specific guidance here. The council doesn't think SPD would be appropriate. I'm going to look at the sites. I mean, you've said that there's problems with budgets.
Yes, I haven't even got to that yet.
Sorry?
I said I haven't even got to that yet.
No, but I'm trying to sort of focus your... It's a bit like the hospital discussion in a way. You know, there's a limit to what this document sets out to do in terms of setting a framework for land use planning and dealing with planning applications and future development. And it can set an overall policy context for sustainable transport provision, including cycling. The council say that it thinks it does that adequately anyway. You've said, well, the wording needs to be stronger. I can look at that, and I can look at the wording of the policy. You know, it's difficult. I can't say, you know, write in a policy saying, you know, we should provide a strategic cycle routes, you know, or that we, you know, develop a strategic cycle route without sort of budgets and more evidence about where that money might come from, and that's not necessarily what this document to do.
Our interests in this are twofold. The planning framework as a working document for all future detailed applications and discussions about potential developments is not strong enough.
Okay, I've got that
but
point,
we
and I
have
can look at
specific comments relating to particular strategic sites and the lack of work that's been done on cycling infrastructure required for those sites. And we have specific evidence of the failures of the existing system under the core policy that I think clearly indicate that the planning framework will fail in exactly the same way unless something is done about it.
Yeah, so what you say needs to be done about it is firstly to rewrite the overarching policy, correct?
Yes, so that it's stronger, and then come up with a supplementary document that is far more detailed.
Yes, okay, well there's some issues about that. Well, the council doesn't want to do that. Okay, well, I can consider that. I don't know whether I need to ask any more questions about that. Let's park that for a minute.
Of course, sorry, yeah.
And then go on to look at the detailed site policy. So we've got 2 allocations in this, and they are, well, that's SD8, isn't it? It's one of them. But the SD1, let's look at that first. SD1 and SD8 I've mentioned, but that's general transport infrastructure, isn't it? Oh, in both strategic allocations, is that?
It's specific to North Horsham, that one.
SD8. And then we've got SD9. Which is the specific policy for the South Water extension. Which doesn't mention anything about cycling.
It's not specific. It does have reference to infrastructure, which cycling would fall under, and of course all of the other policies would be captured in any proposals for there as well. So going back to policies 36 and 39 would indeed be relevant there.
Well, okay, let's discuss that in a minute. Let's go back to SD1 and North Horsham. You've got some concerns about cycle provision in the strategic allocation.
Yes, the A264, as been said before, is going to create serious severance between Horsham and the north of Horsham, which leads to, there are a lot of difficulties in larger distance to local centres, lack of local facilities that are without crossing the bypass, longer travel to school distances, the fact it's Crawley facing, many aspects of it promoting the use of motorised transport. We're very concerned that there will be increased traffic congestion in Horsham due to 2 factors. Firstly, the additional traffic from the development going in and out of Horsham along the existing already congested roads which have not got suitable cycling infrastructure. And secondly, due to the signalisation of the A264, that will cause an increase of traffic to travel through Horsham in order to bypass the bypass, to rat run. The core principles...
Okay, let's take one of those one at a time. The development will increase traffic on roads into and out of Horsham. what are you seeking as the solution to that?
Um,
Or are you just saying...
We're saying that...
Or are you just opposed to the North Horsham development on the principle?
No, the Cycling Forum looks at each development on its merits rather than trying to decide for or against a development, because there are many other factors that come into play in addition to cycling. And there are particular difficulties with North Horsham because of cycling. If the North Horsham development goes ahead, then there needs to be a proper traffic study looking at the needs of cyclists for infrastructure to get into Horsham, east-west across the development where it appears that the east-west links are very weak, and also we have some concerns about the Horsham to Crawley cycle route. At the moment, if you want to cycle into Horsham from the North Horsham development using a route that would qualify as a cycle route, i.e. something that would meet a CSNA level 2 criteria, Cycle Skills Network Audit level 2 criteria, and you'd probably find very similar things from the newly developed Welsh active travel audit tools on roads that avoid the need to have been at least bikeability level 3 standard. And the route that you would have to take into Horsham from the phase 1 start of the building, which is over to the east of the North Horsham development, would be in a loop round through the middle of the development, looping up, going across the bypass, going round the western edge of Horsham, going round.
What plan is that?
This is of Google Maps. It's just showing showing the way you would go without avoiding these difficult roads. And instead of a journey by car of 2.6 miles, you'd have a journey by bike of 5.7 miles, which is clearly totally impractical. There's nobody in the real world that would do that. That means that the only routes that are into Horsham from the development require you to go along major distributor roads, which all the supporting evidence show have inadequate cycling infrastructure already. In many cases, it's actually missing. Even where it is shown on the Horsham, I say shown on the Horsham District Council cycle map, they've recently withdrawn that, but as a Horsham District cycle route, that's generally going along fragmented cycle lanes that are actually narrower, not only than the minimum guidance in LTN 208, but narrower than the distance that Cyclecraft and government bikeability standards would say you should be cycling from the curb for your safety.
Yes.
So part of the Section 106 settlement should be that there needs to be funding for proper studies of the routes and the traffic levels and the measures needed along those routes to make them viable cycle routes, and that funding needs to be guaranteed.
Right. So you're seeking a requirement in here somewhere in Strategic Policy SD1 that...
Well, it's relevant to every single strategic site,
well,
and indeed to non-strategic.
There's only two.
Yes, well, I don't know what you may decide, but
well, I'm talking about what's in the plan at the moment, and I'm trying to. I mean, I'm trying to take on your points. I mean, some of these are, new points that you're making here in evidence that really should have been submitted before the hearing.
I apologise for that. The person who was going to give the evidence had a family crisis and was able to submit a statement, and so by the time I realised it was the deadline day for submission already, and I rang up Claire Jones-Hughes and discussed this, and she was very clear that I should make all this, submit all this verbally.
Well, sorry, she said what? You shouldn't submit
I should be submitting it verbally because there was no way that I could submit a statement after the cut-off date.
Yeah, well, but there's a limit to which, in the interest of fairness and efficiency, I can take on board new points for the council might come back to me and just say, well, I'm sorry, we haven't had a chance to consider any of this. I don't know if you are going to, but I'm trying to flesh out quickly, because there's a lot of other people here as well. This is taking a lot more time than it should have done, is my point to you.
I think if they...
And that what in trying to seek out what you really think the plan should change. I've got some of it, I think. You now seem to be saying that you want one of the policy for North Horsham to say that further measures should be provided to improve cycling safety on the routes between the development and Horsham town centre through the provision of a funded cycle study, and presumably the measures, if any measures are recommended to go in, that they should be, how are they going to be funded? Who are you expecting to fund that?
Well, these are measures that are required in greater measure than they have been before because of the development.
What sort of things are you thinking about?
Do
you have any ideas of what you think might be better, what would be required?
There are various ones. For example, the roundabout at the King's Road and Rusper Road has a poor safety record, and if you're funneling cyclists, even more cyclists down there, that will be an increased safety risk. In the years from 2005 to 2013, there have been 18 personal injury and accidents.
I don't want that sort of... please just try and concentrate on my questions, without going into providing a whole lot of extra evidence. I mean, I'll take some of the evidence as read. I'm just trying to get an idea for what you think is required. I'm trying to think of a way of, you want a study into improve cycle improvement, into possible cycle improvements between the site and North Horsham, right?
Yes.
And that would look at what? Things like...
it would look at meeting government
routes,
guidance.
Change junctions?
Yes, it would look at meeting government, at a minimum, meeting current government guidance, which is getting somewhat out of date. The Department of Transport are looking for improved offers from councils to go beyond that now. But you would expect at a minimum that it should be meeting the requirement or the guidance in LTN 208, which is on cycle infrastructure design.
Right, so all the roads between the site and Horsham Town Centre should be improved to a standard that meets that guidance?
Yes.
Right, what does the council say about that?
Sorry. Thanks, sir. I think in terms of a lot of the points that have been raised, they are very detailed and very specific routes in terms of the strategic plan itself. In terms of looking at town centre and linkages to that, then that is something that will be picked up in the detailed transport assessment for the planning application. And indeed, on a planning application for any of the strategic sites, we will expect the TA to look at all of those access routes and proposed cycling facilities as well. I think that the policies that we have are sufficiently robust enough to, if we considered that there were issues, to refuse an application.
Which particular part of SD1 do you think would cover that point?
Oh, in terms of SD1, you're looking at bullet point 1, and 3 as well. That looks at the provisions of facilities and also the connectivity and routes and modes of transport towards the wider area.
So the last sentence, it should have strong, sustainable connections to Horsham.
Yeah. And bullet point 3 as well, sir. Certainly the last part of that.
Well, that's within... yeah, that's fairly clear.
Also,
yeah.
sorry, so we've got the supporting text as well at paragraph 7.50 and 7.51, and that looks at specific locations and again emphasises that new, safer cycling routes and crossings would be expected to be delivered as part of that development, which would increase good connectivity to the wider area as well. So it's picked up in the supporting text as well. So I think just in summary, a lot of the detailed issues, that there is a hook on there in both SD1 and SD8 and the supporting text and the more general policies, and then it would be for the detailed transport assessment to look at those as part of any planning application.
Still be concerned about whether that's going to be effective, because although the detail is clearly very important, the detail, providing the detail of cycling infrastructure needs to be built in right from the beginning of the process. So, for example, if you took the roundabout, which has a really high 11 out of 18 injuries have been to cyclists, despite the fact that only about 1% of the uses are cycling. A similar roundabout has recently been reconfigured in Cambridge due to a similar accident problem, although not as high a proportion of cyclists were getting injured there. And the reconfiguration of that roundabout cost £400,000. So it's a detail, but if you leave this sort of detail till the last minute, then you obviously aren't going to have funding in order to do it. And the NPPF says you need to give priority to cycle movements, and there hasn't been any studies yet of cycle movements.
So what are you saying, that I shouldn't allocate this site until that study's been done?
Well, yes. It sounds a bit draconian, but as far as I can see, it's quite clear that the plan is unsound with respect to cycling, not just for North Horsham, but for other sites and for ongoing non-strategic sites and maintenance issues as well. And maybe the maintenance does or doesn't come under there, but it would be useful to be able to cover that all in one fell swoop.
Okay, how do you respond to that?
Just a first point, that I think some of the issues raised are perceived as existing problems, potentially on the existing routes and linkages, and just to emphasise that developers, and certainly in accordance with, I think it's section 59 of the SIL regulations, aren't required to fix existing problems and deficiencies. However, the proposals look to ensure that we can look at improvements that can be made to existing routes, networks and linkages. And again, going back and just to emphasise that, again, North Horsham will also be covered by policy 36 and 39, which looks at cycling as a whole and ensures that planning applications look at specific cycling routes and linkages. And again, going back to when the application is submitted, the detailed transport assessment will have to look at cycling, because that is what is clearly set out in the policies, both the specific strategic one for North Horsham and generally policy 39 for sustainable transport.
But the NPPF says that you need to give people a real choice about how they travel, and that you should be giving priority to cycle movements. And I haven't heard anything in the whole of this inquiry that suggests that a priority has been given in the design to cycle movements. It's all the transport studies have looked at capacity on the major road network and been looking at the motorised vehicles that are travelling along that network.
Okay, any council comments on that?
The policy has reference to safe crossing points and linkages across for the integration of land north of Horsham and the existing settlement area. Also, in terms of, just to pick up on the point relating to design, again, I'll go back to policy 36, which states that proposals must seek to improve the sustainability of development, and going back to that specific criteria, bullet point 5, which states be designed to encourage walking, cycling storage and accessibility to sustainable forms of transport. So again, it's emphasised that the design is important and that proposals must seek to improve. So I think that we would consider that that's fairly strongly written.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to say it needs to be more than just some top-level words in the document. And if you look at the evidence for how this is working, we've got the first planning application for the first strategic site in the west of Worthing Road that's currently going through. And the Cycling Forum has been trying to... we're not a statutory consultee. There's no consultation mechanism, which is something else we'd be seeking. So we've had to look at the developers' proposals and comment on them. And it's the transport assessment, I think that's the correct document, doesn't highlight Horsham as a desire line destination for people from the new development in Southwater, despite the fact that it is 3 miles distant. The only cycling locations that are looked at are within the development itself. We've been going backwards and forwards with Horsham District Council and West Sussex County Council, trying to get something that will help with the very dangerous route into Horsham, which crosses Hoppost roundabout and goes down the Worthing Road past the Tower Hill Junction at Boar's Head. And all those are dangerous to cyclists. And the request to the developer for their transport studies asked them to look at the traffic on the bypass and only look at other roads where there was a predicted increase of more than 30%. The traffic modelling for the Worthing Road suggests a traffic increase of 29%. There are no mitigation proposals put forward for Worthing Road because it's acknowledged that, far from giving people a real choice about where to go, that there is a high level of fear and intimidation already along there, and they basically don't expect it to be a realistic route for cycling. This carries forward
but that did come up actually in the west of, in the Southwater discussion, and I've got some notes about that. But you seem to be saying that that doesn't necessarily mean that the council. Are you saying the council's just, you don't like that they're not pursuing? I don't even know if they are pursuing any more than this. If that hasn't been determined yet, has it? The application.
Sorry, pursuing any more on?
Well, pursuing more from the developers or more information
the
about the cycling.
The Cycling Forum has been pursuing more.
No, the council. I mean,
through the council, we've been making representations to West Sussex County Council.
I'm not going to comment on a live planning application. What I'm concerned is the framework.
The framework
You're alleging that doesn't give the council enough leverage to require sustainable transport facilities from the developer in that development site.
Yes, definitely. I'm saying that.
On what grounds? On what grounds that it's the framework that's doing that?
Because there isn't anything else.
Okay, how does the council respond to that? If you can.
Again, so it goes back to the existing policies and the general ones in the plan that would cover any application anywhere across the district. And again, policies 36 and 39.
Well, so presumably this isn't in yet, but if they reflect existing policies, presumably you're dealing with a planning application. Have you got any further information about what's happening with that or not? Can you not discuss it at this stage?
I can't discuss that at this stage, sorry.
Can I just make a couple of points?
No, not yet.
But it's in relation.
Finish with the cycling.
This is in relation to cycling.
Well, no. I'm trying to let Miss Fletcher say, what she wants to say. I mean, I've given you at least an hour, Miss Fletcher, about all this, trying to flesh out from you material that should have been submitted to me. Is there anything else you want to say about the strategic sites? You've heard what the council said is that the SD1 requires sustainable transport provision. Do you want to say that the criteria should be reworded to say giving priority to cycle networks or something like that? Have you got any suggested wording for SD1?
It's very difficult coming from outside the process to have preempted what the forum here would be like and what opportunities there would be to do this. I mean, I'm coming back to the not positively prepared thing, and I'm saying that frankly, as a volunteer, I shouldn't need to be here. There isn't a Horsham District Motorists Forum saying, please remember to connect a road to the new development. This should have been done by the council. Other councils have policies in place and are meeting higher levels of provision that are closer to or meet national guidance. And we are not. We're missing out on infrastructure for our district. We're missing out as a council on the ability to get maximise our opportunities to get central funding because we don't have detailed policies in place.
Just a minute, but they wouldn't, if you want to give me a couple of examples, I'll look them up, of other councils. But they might be local transport plans, for example, which this isn't. This document
but
isn't.
It's Horsham that has to deliver the planning applications, and if they choose to do it via West Sussex, then that's fair enough, but they're not doing it.
About cycle networks and improvements, that would be through another document, possibly, is what I'm saying. But do you want to give me any references? Just give me a couple of references if you want to.
So you mean particular examples of issues where they're not meeting the NPPF on previous developments? Is that what you mean?
No. You refer to other councils.
Oh, well, Cambridge is probably a better verdict. Cambridge and London are probably a good place to start.
Okay, I'll look at those.
Surrey is developing. I don't know whether it's actually been formally approved, but Surrey has a cycle strategy.
Okay.
There are quite a lot. I'm not familiar with all of them.
Okay, look, I can't, in fairness to other people here, I'm not going to let you speak for another 2 or 3 hours about all this. I'm asking you for your key points. So you should have been aware, actually, that from the notes, that the pre-hearing meeting notes, that if you wanted to appear or make representations, one of the key things I said in that is, I need to know what changes are required, as I said in the opening, that are required to make your plan sound in your view. So that's why I keep asking you what other things you think the plan should be. I've got the council's answers that they think the policies are sufficient. Is there anything else that you want to say to me in terms of what the plan should do that it's currently not doing, and suggested changes to the plan that you think I should make?
needs to look at levels of potential cycling given the infrastructure provision. It needs to look at complete networks, including skills levels required to cycle them. There should be improved cycle parking standards for residences. The process should require...
Wait. I'll just write those down and list. What was the first bullet point there?
Look at potential levels of cycling given appropriate infrastructure, not existing levels of cycle, when deciding whether to build infrastructure. Because if all the evidence documents say that cycling is suppressed because of a lack of safe and adequate connecting infrastructure, so if you can always say that the level of cycling is currently low because there's no infrastructure, you don't need to provide any infrastructure because the cycling is low.
Yeah, okay, but what does the plan do? What should the plan... I still not saying... Are we just coming back to the point you think there should be a supplementary planning document to provide for a cycling framework outside of this document?
I think without it, the plan is unsound. Now, you may say legally that a document that would make it sound can't have that level of weight, I don't know.
All right, so we're back to the SBD point. I'll consider it.
Can I make a point that might help here? I think that Russell Parish Council we thought had raised enough issues with the plan as a whole to make the whole thing unsound. In relation to Policy 39...
Well, yeah, so you seem to be saying, OK, that I should just say, right, it's unsound for these reasons.
But
go back,
if you don't...
redo the whole thing.
I think the point here is that Policy 39 doesn't...
2 years delay.
Yeah, no, but Policy 39, I think, if you're not making that decision, then Policy 39 should be reworded, at least, to match the minimum criteria of the NPPF, which it doesn't do currently from the evidence we've heard. So I think that would be the recommendation that's being suggested from the Cycling Forum, that policy statement...
Well, I've already got that, Mr. Sarris. Yeah. So that you're repeating something that's already been said.
Supporting things. The other point I would make in relation to cycling and infrastructure as a whole, in relation to the North Horsham development, was that within its own study, the precise wording of the CIL appraisal was that the appraisals demonstrated that the land north of Horsham strategic site was not viable if the proposed district-wide residential CIL charge of £125 was applied. This was primarily due to the significant infrastructure costs of £58.1 million required to support and mitigate the impact of the proposed development. It was concluded that reduced residential CIL rate of £50 per square metre would be required to ensure deliverability of the land north of Horsham, taking account of the full policy requirements of the NDPF. I think what that's saying is that the amount of cost that's been identified by the cycling group to mitigate all of the crossing points and everything else around this development would not be available. That money is not going to be forthcoming from the CIL.
You've extrapolated that way beyond what it says.
Aren't we reliant on the CIL contribution to provide that funding? Otherwise, where is that funding coming from?
The developers.
Not as part of the CIL?
Well, no, that's what they're saying, that the SIL reduction, there wouldn't be a SIL there, because, one still, even if with SIL, which we're going to come on to, we'll have to break and come back after to finish off, unless anyone's... I think I've done with this cycling. I've got your key points.
There's one key point.
I'll take them away. Just a minute, I haven't finished. I don't know whether we need to... If we can continue for another few minutes and conclude everything, I'd prefer to do that. But it's quite... we haven't discussed SIL, but what the SIL regime allows for site-specific Section 106 payments to be made to deal with on-site requirements for infrastructure that meet the tests of regulations 122, I think it is, of the SIL regulations. And what you said there was just almost a non sequitur. It was a complete extrapolation. It was nothing to do with just the cycle facilities making it not viable.
Well, no, I think that
that's what you said.
Well, yes, because
you said that's what it implied. It's all the infrastructure.
Yes, that's right. But
not just the cycle infrastructure.
But the cycling infrastructure costs that have been identified by my friend along the line here have not been taken into account in this costing. So that money isn't available. So there is no SIL available for it, and there is no infrastructure allowance for it within the current plan. The other important point that I really want to make is in relation to traffic movements outside of the site itself. And the bulk of those traffic movements are going to be create a significant increase on traffic flow through the lanes to the north of the site, especially with the congestion.
I'm not going back into North Horsham discussion, Mr. Savage.
I'm talking about cycling. So
right.
I'm talking specifically about cycling. So that traffic is
coming out. So what are you
out.
saying then, that there should be... What infrastructure do you think is missing in the plan?
Yeah, I think that there is no infrastructure in the plan that talks about the provision for safety for cyclists and other non-motorised road users to the north of the development. And there will be significant...
Well, I don't think that's true either, actually.
It is.
Well, because there's a requirement for... there is something... where did I read about...
There was a word about mitigation. I think that was the word that was in there. Rusper Parish Council have been working for the last 14 years with West Sussex County Council to improve the infrastructure of the roads for non-motorised road users. And there are cost constraints that have stopped some of our proposals coming forward, but the vast majority of it is that you couldn't mitigate against the level of extra traffic. We're struggling to mitigate against the current levels of traffic. So we've been doing this survey for the last 14 years with West Sussex to try and improve that situation.
So I'll repeat my question to you. What infrastructure requirements do you think are missing for the plan on the way that it's predicated? I'm not going to reopen the issue of whether or not North Horsham should go ahead. Assuming it does...
Yeah, assuming it does. There is no mitigation.
What infrastructure requirements do you think the plan should include that are missing from it at the moment?
So mitigation for the non-motorised users along the roads to the north of the site, which will take the bulk of the increase of traffic. And our position is that can't happen, so that makes North Horsham unsound.
Well, okay, how does the council respond to that? The plan should include some mitigation to improve non-motorised users' safety on the roads leading north of the site. Well, does it include that? That question, and if not, do you agree it should?
Yes, policy SD1 makes specific reference to legible layouts and facilities for all modes of sustainable travel within the development area and to provide linkages to Horsham. I was just looking up the reference to in SD9, which specifically talks about there's a requirement to design to discourage through traffic along rural roads. So, in other words, those roads surrounding the development, including those to the north.
Those words are absolutely meaningless without some proposal as to how that could be achieved, I would say.
Yeah,
and also policy 39, criteria C, makes reference to integration with the wider road network. So that would pick up issues that haven't been identified as specific locations, but it does identify that the wider network to any application will be considered through any development proposals. And it specifically makes reference to cycling within that criteria.
But North Horsham is a specific development proposal in your own plan, so where is that information? It's not anywhere in the plan.
Again, it's Policy 39, which covers any proposals across the district, including land north of Horsham and the other strategic site.
Yeah, but how do you propose to do that with the site that's specifically identified? I come back to the same question, which isn't answered, I don't think.
Well, they might. We're going back over old ground again.
Specifically in relation to infrastructure, specifically infrastructure in relation to cyclists
you're
and
presumably
non-motorised
not
road
going to be
users.
helpful in suggesting anything that could be done, like...
we can be helpful in suggesting what can be done, and that's not to locate a major development.
Cycle route alongside, or it could be something like that. That would presumably come out of the detailed assessment. Your answer to that, presumably.
And our answer is not to locate a major development on the north of a highway network that's already flooded, that will force traffic that is predominantly going to the industrial areas around Gatwick and Crawley, to use those back roads.
So you're just reopening the North Horsham argument, Mr. Sallows.
I'm saying that we have legitimate concerns about the safety of non-motorised road users.
I listened to them for about 10 hours, about a week last Tuesday,
all
of these concerns.
Haven't brought up any points about non-motorised road users.
You did. We dealt with it. I remember it. I've got notes about it.
Well, that was in relation of increased traffic flow, not in relation specifically to other users.
Well, there's... it wasn't necessary. Well, I think it was mentioned, actually. It was mentioned and discussed, so I'm not going to reopen all of that. Ms. Fletcher, you've still got your board up.
Yes, I want to know how the council knows that it has adequate 106 and SIL funding for the necessary cycle infrastructure if it hasn't assessed the cycle infrastructure that's needed.
Well, that sort of goes to viability. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, the infrastructure delivery plan sets out some cycling provisions. In addition, we have the policies, certainly the strategic sites, which looks at cycling in terms of land north of Horsham, as we covered earlier. That is predominantly through Section 106. Again, if the council does adopt a SIL charging schedule, there would be funding available for then, but equally it must look at funding strategic infrastructure, and as we touched on earlier, some of the issues that you have highlighted are probably perceived to be existing deficiencies, and again that neither Section 106 or SIL should be funding existing deficiencies. So there has been in terms of infrastructure, there has been cycling made reference to both the strategic sites and in the infrastructure work that's been undertaken.
I mean, with regard to North Horsham, clearly there would be requirements to meet these criteria, which I'm going to look at and revisit in the light of what you've said. We've had I think it's... I'll reconsider the viability evidence. I mean, there clearly are requirements. I haven't seen... There's cycle routes shown on the draft master plan, isn't there? I mean, you might not consider that's adequate, but there's cycle routes.
If you look at the core principles in LTN 208, one of the key ones is, of course, that it should be direct, whereas that cycle route takes you from the east of the development up northwards in the development to the west of the development, all the way around the west of Horsham, down to river level and up again, down to river level and up again. And it's still then, if it was any realistic chance of anyone cycling, it would still be going along a level 3 road, which there's no plan to mitigate. And that also violates another core principle of safety, attractiveness.
I'll make a note about the viability issue. Okay, is there anything else you want to say on cycling and the plan?
I really would want to reiterate the issue of the at-grade crossings. That there's
new points.
In respect of cycling, that we would strongly dispute that though an at-grade crossing is genuinely preferred. It was clear from the answers to the WSP transport.
Sorry, by whom? You? Isn't that what you want?
An at-grade crossing?
Yeah.
No?
What do you want? Dedicated bridges?
Yes. Bridges or underpasses, yes. Because if you're going to be, if you're a Year 7 child from north of existing Horsham going into the new school in the north of Horsham development, you want to have a safe and segregated crossing, and it would full segregation would meet LTN 208. There are about 40,000 traffic movements on that road.
Anything else before I ask the council to respond on that?
Let me respond on that.
Well, have you got anything else? Key points.
I do have lots of things. I'm trying to work out whether there's anything else that I should be prioritising here.
Well, I'm looking for key points that you think you've made, where you think the plan, needs to be reconsidered. You haven't come back with me on anything about a cycle, anything about requiring a cycle network, or it seems to me that's outside of this plan actually. Anyway, I asked you about it just to see what your views
we're
on
requiring. We're requiring that there should be safe, convenient, attractive, accessible, adaptable routes that take people where they want to go, in the words of the NPPF, and that is a cycle network, and it will include segregated provision, on-road, off-road provision, cycle tracks,
and do you think
selective
that should be
permeability, traffic speed restrictions, traffic calming.
Okay, yeah, all right. So, but do you think that should be a sort of separate section, if you like, of this document? I thought you were saying that should be an SPD document.
You're obviously looking to make the planning framework effective. We've established it's no stronger than the existing framework, which is not effective in achieving this. So it does need to be strengthened. It does need to have consultation. It needs to look at maximising the opportunities from maintenance programmes. It needs to the council needs to ensure that they use adequately qualified and experienced staff in the specialist cycle infrastructure design.
Okay, all right. I've got that. I'd like the council to respond to both those general points, please. And then I'm going to close it.
Thank you, sir. So just to pick up on those 2 points, I mean, again, it goes back to some of the detailed issues and specific mitigation that's being suggested there. A lot of that will go back to detailed transport assessments. In terms of the funding, then that will be looked at through Section 106, where it will be required in accordance with Regulation 122 of the SIL regulations. And also, just in terms of our policies, they have been positively prepared. Policy SD1, SD8, SD9 for the South Water Policy, the second to last bullet point, all make reference to connectivity both within the specific strategic allocations and the wider area. In addition, Policy 5, Town Centre, makes reference to the connectivity towards Horsham itself, and then Policies 34, 36 and 39 look at specific design and sustainable transport modes. No specific policy wording change has been put forward to us to consider, and we are of the view that the policies as they are within the plan are in accordance with the NPPF and have been positively prepared.
Okay. What was your point, Councillor Arthur?
I was going to start talking about transport studies in general, but I assume that you want to do that, sir, after the vote.
Yeah, I haven't received a supplementary statement from you. What's your key point about the plan and infrastructure?
In relation to transport.
Microphone, please.
Clearly, congestion will have a number of different impacts. There'll be an impact, as we said earlier, on ambulance response times. Also on town centre footfall. The town economy is regarded as quite fundamental in this district. Then there's the congestion impact on productivity. The other key factor...
Sorry, but this is... so what are you saying with regard to infrastructure? What's missing from the plan, or where's the plan unsound with regard to what it says about infrastructure?
I don't see any sensitivity analysis on those issues or when pollution levels will approach the statutory limit. We've already got areas in the district where that is already approaching, the pollution is already approaching the statutory limits. I think that the transport study should identify those problems, and it should identify what measures are going to be taken and what funding is needed.
But I'm not assessing the soundness of any transportation studies. I'm assessing the soundness of the plan. I'm still at a loss to know.
Well, there's also.
I'm not going to have a sort of general discussion about transportation studies, or the transport plan, that's information that's behind the plan to justify the strategic allocations. Is that? Did you want to? I mean, I'm not planning to revisit that.
No, I really was talking about the impact on those factors, but also to recognise that it might itself restrict the practical build-out rates in some areas.
What might?
Well, if for example,
the lack of infrastructure. And what infrastructure?
If the road system is not improved, then clearly the number of people exposed to pollution could increase. We already have a village in the district where that is happening. What I'm saying is we don't need to wait until that happens. We should identify what measures are needed before we get to that stage. And I don't see that in the coming out of the transport studies.
I'm still not clear about what you think's unsound with regard to the plan and infrastructure provision.
Well, if we had an infrastructure a projection on the infrastructure needs against what we think is going to happen as a result of these developments,
which we do,
but it does. There are cases where it doesn't extend to issues such as the ones I've just mentioned. Now, if that could well have an impact, not only on fatality rates, as we discussed in relation to ambulance response times, but it could also have an impact on the build-out rates. I mean, we know, for example, that the business park in Horsham will require travelling. What we don't know is how many of those jobs are going to be local. We don't know whether there's going to be a railway station. There are a number of issues relating to this programme that have not been properly flushed out.
Does the council want to make a comment on that? I'm not quite sure how one can take that forward if we do break and come back after lunch.
I think, sir, that from the council's perspective, that these issues are specific to Land North of Horsham, and we have no further to add than when we discussed this on the Land North of Horsham Day.
mean, is that what you're seeking to do, Councillor Arthur? Go back into the discussion on North Horsham? Yes, we did discuss all of this.
Well, it obviously impacts on transport. As I mentioned, just take one issue alone. That is whether or not there's going to be a railway station. That has a significant impact.
Well, I'm not going to go into that again. I mean, I've got evidence about all of that.
Right. So what is the proposal to deal with that in the event that there's no railway station?
Well, that was discussed. What the plan, that goes back to the point that the plan does all it can, was the council's answer. But I'm not. I mean, again, this session is not intended, and it's certainly the agenda doesn't say that that's going to happen. With regard to, it's a district-wide infrastructure question. I've dealt in some detail, I think, about infrastructure requirements for the strategic sites that are allocated, and I was just looking to see whether there's anything else like cycle infrastructure, possibly, that where people felt there were shortcomings, or any other services or any other infrastructure. I mean, the other point about this we haven't discussed is that the council has started advertising and getting comments on a draft still. What's the current position with that?
We consulted on the preliminary draft charging schedule between May and June this year.
Yeah.
In the draft LDS, which was submitted as an appendix to Matter 1 or Matter 2, sets out that we're proposing a draft consultation early next year, and that will probably bring us to an examination in about summer next year, and then potential adoption in probably about September.
Can I be permitted to ask a more general infrastructure question in relation to roads? And in that,
well, I'm not quite sure I've finished with Councillor Arthur yet. I mean, just wait a sec.
I think so. You understand. I'm satisfied from what you said that you understand all the issues, so I'm not going to pursue those any further. Just one other question relates to expanded parking capacity. Clearly, there will be a need to accommodate thousands of extra cars that will emerge from the new settlements. If they're not to be put off coming into the town, obviously they need two things. One is they don't need congestion on the way in, and the other thing is they need to be able to park in the town. I haven't seen the figures which say that the parking in the town needs to be expanded by 5%, 10%, or whatever it is. I haven't seen them.
Well, that's another North Horsham point. Yeah, Mrs. Haig, you've had your board up for longer than Mr. Sallows.
Thank you, sir.
Do you have any other general infrastructure points that you want to make?
I wanted to address question 41. Does the IDP include all essential elements of infrastructure? And I wanted to look at that in terms of Horsham District, not just with regard to North Horsham.
Yeah.
Because I consider that having 13,000 homes across the district in that 20-year period is going to give us a lot of problems. The IDP refers to congestion on existing roads as it stands, and I feel there's a need for more of... the infrastructure needs to be addressed more than it's being done in this document.
In what sort of way? Just a minute, please, Mr. Sallows.
In what sort of way?
What are you saying, that the IDP is inadequate? Or?
Well, the IDP says there are concerns with the A29, the A281, A272, A283 and A2037, that they all suffer congestion. We know the existing approved applications for the Billingshurst area and Southwater areas mean there's going to be more traffic coming up the A29, which is itself an inadequate road. We have possibility of more development at North Horsham, which would mean more people travelling up the A24, which is another inadequate road between Horsham and Capel, although it's fairly well dual carriageway further south, and then once you get beyond Capel, it's okay. But there are already issues there because of the blockages at Dorking. So the overall network is creaking at the seams. It really does need addressing. I'm not sure that the recommendations in the IDP and the SIL were going to meet those needs.
Well, does the council want to comment on that first?
Thank you, sir. Yes, so the council undertook the cumulative impact assessment, which looked at development which has been proposed in the HDPF. That identifies mitigation measures where it is required. That study has been signed off by both West Sussex County Council, who are the highway authority, and the Highways Agency. In addition, we've had discussions with our neighbouring authorities and the assessment has been effectively signed off by Surrey County Council as well, as reference there was made to Dorking. In terms of capacity and provision in general, we have policy 38, and that makes specific reference to capacity, not just transport but all infrastructure capacity, and that seeks to ensure that new development is appropriate in terms of what infrastructure is there, or indeed if there is at capacity, then improvements and mitigation would be required as part of that development.
Could I come back on that, please, sir?
Yeah.
I think there's an assumption that people will work locally, and I think there's a lack of understanding exactly how many people commute out of this district. If you refer to the Nathaniel Litchfield Economic Growth Assessment, they look at the functional economic area. And in that they say there's 60,000 jobs in Horsham, 15,000 people commute in for those jobs, but of the residents' population, 25,000 as of 2001 commute out. Now that's 13 years out of date. There are a lot more people moving into Horsham who commute out of the town. They either use the trains or they use the roads, and the road network is already struggling without all of this new housing being built. So we have an issue, and it hasn't been fully addressed, to my opinion.
Well, the council's response to you has been, that there has been a traffic study using the county's model, factoring in the projected growth for the whole of the plan period for all of the sites, and that the County Highway Authority is satisfied that adequate infrastructure provisions being set out in the IDP, and that there's, it could be funded through developer contributions or SIL or other measures.
I think some of
There's definitely a funding gap. I mean, that's presumably if I do the SIL examination, which I think is still projected, that's something I'll be looking at. But in terms of, the viability of developments and even whether or not, for example, the nil rate for North Horsham is correct.
I think where we have the strategic sites, such as Kilnwood Vale, there are improvements to the road immediately adjoining Kilnwood Vale. And similarly, with North Horsham, there are, I don't call them improvements, but there will be modifications to the A264 adjoining the site. What I'm saying is, you need to understand where people travel to work. And a lot of people travel out of Horsham. They either go on the trains where the network is struggling. We have a line going up from Horsham via Warnham and Dorking,
okay.
which needs improving. We have a road from Horsham to Dorking, which needs improving. And those cannot be addressed by the strategic developments themselves because it's outside, what was the phrase earlier?
Well,
it wasn't permitted or something.
Okay, no, they can't. The SIL regs. But my understanding is that those, you say it might need improving, but that isn't necessarily a position that the plan finds itself in. That if, presumably, let's go back to what we were talking about yesterday afternoon, about in-principle issues with regard to highway safety, transport capacity or whatever. And the modelling, what the council say is that the modelling has been done through the study, correct? And that study would take into account impacts further afield because it's modelled over the whole network, albeit only in the AM peak. And that the county said that there isn't the development at North Horsham, for example, wouldn't create undue problems that can't be, the capacity, but say on the A24 north of Horsham isn't so limited that it couldn't accommodate that development. That's what I understand the position to be from the county council. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. The council's own evidence, which is, as you say, signed off by the county council's transport authority, did look at the wider area, hence our discussions with the Surrey County Council Transport Authority as well. And obviously that will be supplemented by specific transport assessments that are completed by the promoters of a scheme, but also have to be signed off by the County Council. And just to illustrate the point, when Kilnwood Vale came about, there are a number of improvements that are made to roundabout junctions throughout the Crawley itself, because there was a significant amount actually of off-site improvements that were necessary. All the indications so far is that that would not be the case at North Horsham because the improvements are much more localised, but nevertheless the council study looked at a much wider area.
I think something else that does need to be taken into consideration, it comes down to the duty to cooperate. When we build homes in Horsham, they're very expensive. An average 4-bedroom house is 700,000 or thereabouts. People were moving out to Horsham from London and Surrey because they can afford those houses, so they would then still travel back into London. People who need to work in Horsham cannot afford to live here. They live on the coast, and they can then commute into Horsham. The cheapest house in Horsham is about 250,000, which tends to go for buy-to-lets. So we do have this issue that Horsham itself, Horsham district is almost a dormitory area, and we need a good, strong road network as well as all the cycling infrastructure, and we need the public transport. I think the 13,000 homes will mean that we are absolutely at the limits in Horsham. If Gatwick happens, which I know we can't take that into account, that would be a major step change, and we would need to reassess all of the networks across West Sussex to make sure that people can access around the towns and villages without creating rat runs. I think at the moment we're going to get rat runs through several of the villages across the area as people try to dodge all the congestion. In addition to that, the town itself isn't designed for the size it's becoming, and we do have issues in the town about parking and the roads into the town because they're not geared up to the volume of traffic that they're going to get. And I don't think that this has been adequately addressed within the IDP.
Okay, well, that's sort of reiterating the same point. Does the council want to comment on any of those other things?
No, sir, I don't think we have anything further to add. Thank you.
Could I make another point, please, sir?
How many more have you got? Because if you've got lots, I'm going to just stop and come back after lunch.
Well, there was an issue about the Section 106 on the west of Horsham development where we had a shortfall. We were concerned that if North Horsham goes ahead, we should have an area action plan so that we make sure that we do have the right funding to deliver the infrastructure that's associated with that development, rather than an SPD master plan. We think that that's very important. Kilnwood Vale was much more successful. It didn't have that shortfall in Section 106.
Well, I've just been reading about that. I mean, I understand what happened with that, with the council's case, is that the the Section 106 was renegotiated to reduce the affordable housing requirement because it did have because effectively there was a shortfall. I mean, there's a limited pot, isn't there? I mean, this comes up in civil examinations and viability assessments all the time. Which is something that I've got evidence about North Horsham, so I'll look at that. But the issue that might have been market factors. It was alleged by Savills that it wasn't. That it was just planning delays. But the council said it was also economic factors that slowed down the delivery there. But I mean, again, if we're looking at revisiting North Horsham, I've got information about that. I'll look at that. But the point is that I'll just have to relook at the evidence to see whether or not if the council's requirements are reasonable, and they include things like cycle provision and road junctions and health facilities and all the rest of it, things we've been talking about. And whether or not that makes it, an unviable development or something else has to go. So, I mean, you're going back into something that I've already considered. That's why I'm not, happy to be reminded that I've got to look at that.
Okay. I had two other points generally on infrastructure, which one was to do with open spaces, that we're lacking our open space within the town. We had a lot of infill. We're likely to have infill on the Novartis sites and the Holbrook sites. There isn't enough provision for land for open space to replace that land that's been lost. And that is a concern for us. We're getting developers' contributions. So that's policy 42 of the HDPF. And in looking at how we grow Horsham, we do need to make sure that we do provide that recreational open space. So that's a minor point from our point of view. And one other point about education. In all the discussion about primary schools and secondary and where children are bused to or not bused to, I didn't hear any mention of the sixth form college. The Collier sixth form is in my ward. Again, it's bursting at the seams. With all this additional housing, we need to address how we provide that level of education and whether that's provided at any of the new schools or if we need a new facility.
Okay, well, do you want to comment on those two things, open space and education?
As I've been having the direct discussions with the principal of the sixth form college, it's probably best that I cover that bit and then I'll hand over to Ms. Sissons. But we've been on ongoing discussions with sixth form. There is capacity there. At the moment, they take students from a very great distance away because it has an extremely good reputation with excellent results. But the view of the principal is that there is sufficient capacity, and indeed there's a specific requirement in the Land North of Horsham policies for contributions to enable additional places to provide for sixth form education.
What about any comment on open space? I mean, that seems to be talking about existing problems, or.
In terms of existing problems, we obviously have existing policies in the development control policies documents. I think they're 21 and 22, but don't quote me, double check that. But policy 42 obviously rolls those provisions forward, and criteria 3 specifically has criteria which are set out the context in which that loss of facilities would be considered, and generally speaking we would try to resist those.
All right. Mr. Sallows?
What? A very brief point. So in relation to the development that went on along Kilmwood Vale, in response to that, I quote, West Sussex County Council said that Crawley would need a relief road to accommodate houses west of Bewbush. The number brought forward in that instance could be accommodated without a relief road, but any more could not. So that was a direct statement from West Sussex in relation to development along Kilmwood Vale, that any further development would need a relief road.
I'm not writing that down because I've dealt with that in the west of Crawley discussion. Dr. Smith?
Comment A comment from me and a request for clarification either from you or the council, sir. We've been told that the draft charging schedule is to be the subject of public consultation, so therefore it could be subject to change. So therefore we don't know whether the CIL receipts anticipated will be sufficient to pay for identified need for infrastructure. And also, my understanding is that developers can appeal against CIL rates proposed by Horsham District Council, so it would seem to me that there's a risk there. And also, then, there is a possibility that the shortfall that has been identified currently could be considerably in excess of the 10 million plus already identified. So that's just a comment. And clarification. Please, sorry.
Yeah.
And
All right.
this might come over a little bit garbled, but it's to do with CIL collection and the way CIL payments are received. My understanding from planning November, or earlier this month, in fact, is that a problem has been identified because CIL payments apparently, they drip feed, they can trickle in. And if that's the case, then can the council be sure that receipts from CIL will, over a period, accumulate such that they will be able to pay for infrastructure on a timely basis? So from a project planning point of view, there might be a mismatch between CIL receipts and the need to pay for infrastructure and provide that infrastructure, sir. And perhaps you could clarify on that point.
Well, I will when I've held the SIL examination, I think. If it's me that does it.
But it is an important point,
that
isn't it?
Well, yeah, but there's an overall infrastructure position, isn't there, with site-specific requirements, things that are essential, meet the regulations to be provided to make a development go ahead. The council also has other projects which, they might affect the timescale with which they're done, and that depends. The SIL receipts they get will obviously depend on whether they meet their housing trajectory, for example, or I can't remember what's in the draft SIL. I've had a quick look at it. Is there any employment? There is some employment, isn't there? And whether they get any retail development, for example, that generates other receipts. So they do that. So I don't think that can be answered, to be honest, at this question. You're saying what might happen in 5 years' time. Well, who knows? One has to take a view on, the viability information and, infrastructure schedule that one's got at the time.
Understand that, so I wouldn't disagree with you, because that's really common sense. But what you've identified or confirmed that there is a risk there, and one would expect to see in an infrastructure delivery plan an allowance for that risk in terms of the what-ifs. If funding is not sufficient from CIL at a specific date or a specific phase of development, then what happens then? And also, that presumably also something that we consider
again,
your question 43, and whether mechanisms for monitoring the effectiveness of the HDPF in regards of infrastructure are adequate.
Well, okay, that sounds like a Mr. Vickery question, what if? That's for me at this examination, to be sure that there's overall, that the strategy isn't at risk through inadequate infrastructure or failure to provide it, or areas where there might be doubt that it could be provided. Does the council want to make a general comment on that? I think we've covered some of those issues in the more particular discussions.
Yeah, thank you, sir. In terms of delivery of infrastructure over a plan period, the infrastructure delivery plan identifies when that infrastructure is likely to be required. In addition to that, in the preliminary draft, the council was also proposing an instalments policy which looks at where there are larger sites to ensure that funding would come forward at various stages of that development as well, to ensure that those larger sites that funding is available early on in that process. And just to clarify,
that's not that won't be before the inspector. That's
for us to do.
That's for your discussion.
Yeah, so it really is the infrastructure delivery plan that sets out that. And just to clarify, we've when we talk about the draft, it was the preliminary draft charge and schedule that we consulted on last time, and working up towards the draft stage, which we haven't yet done.
Okay, Mrs. White.
I take it we've moved on to your question 44 about how is it going to be funded. Am I right? Is it right to raise things about that now? Because we've strayed into SIL and so on.
Well, I was hoping that I could conclude this about 20 minutes ago, but what question do you want to raise in relation? No, I haven't got a question 44.
Somebody's just mentioned the fact that will things, as SIL is paid in instalments, as it were, apparently we're already behind. I'm referring here to the North Horsham County Local Committee minutes of a meeting where they say to date contributions have been received by County Council from the West of Horsham developers for £280,000 only. Anyway, that's by the by, but apparently they're already behind. With regard to, the whole thing is I think this North Horsham site is supposed to be viable. In other words, it's supposed to be cost-effective.
I'm not going back into that.
You're not interested in hearing about the shortfall of SIL of £14 million that is
well,
the West
we discussed
of Horsham.
North Horsham in detail on the North Horsham Day.
Well,
this is a district-wide discussion.
Well, taken that it's a district-wide issue, the council themselves have identified a shortfall of almost £14 million on the West of Horsham developments, the two, Broadbridge Heath, either side of the A24. And if you take into account, on top of that, the shortfall, in the beginning, the SIL was going to be £125 per square metre of residential. That was reduced for North Horsham to £50 per square metre for residential. It's now been reduced to nil on the viability appraisal, Appendix 3B. The SIL is down as nothing. So if they're already behind with getting in SIL payments, and they're going to get nothing, no SIL payments from North Horsham, where is all the money going to come from for all this infrastructure?
Okay. Do the council just want to answer that as a general point?
Thank you, sir. I think the first issues we've already covered, and that was Miss Haig's issue as well, because part of that relates to the West of Horsham strategic site in terms of, I think, the first point that Miss White was raising. In terms of the SIL contributions, yes, the preliminary draft charging schedule set out 125 district-wide and £50 from North Horsham. The updated viability appraisals which have been submitted as part of this examination to show that the site itself is viable does include a zero SIL rate. However, it's important to recognise that as it stands at the moment, the council doesn't have an adopted SIL, and of course SIL is just one form of funding. The largest additional form of funding is Section 106 contributions, which is where it is proposed that infrastructure to deliver the land north of Horsham site will be funded in accordance with the policies set out in the plan as well.
But am I right in thinking S106 payments are only, they can only be taken for site-specific infrastructure?
That's right.
So, for example, now, do you call the railway station site-specific, or is it general infrastructure?
No, it could be. It could be, proportionate, but it certainly could be.
So I'm just, because I believe developers can, if they come across a, by the way, there was another point, suddenly in the viability appraisal, we get amount of...
If it's North Horsham, you're making life very difficult for me here. I'm not reopening the North Horsham debate.
No.
Sorry, I'm not. I've got lots of evidence about that. I don't need to do it.
So you don't want to hear anything
Well,
about
we
the
discussed
viability
we
of it?
discussed infrastructure. No, I don't really. We discussed it at the time. I've got lots of evidence about it, including your comments at the time. I mean, this session is about general infrastructure, not going over matters that
As has
old
just been
matters that we've
pointed
already
out to
talked
me,
about.
actually, apparently the overall funding gap is approaching £8 million.
For what?
It's increased by £8 million.
Well, okay, from when? But that's not new information, is it?
May I just ask Paul Koniski just to answer that question? Because
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm not here to go over all of that again. Has there something new come up that I've missed?
Well,
on
I think
North
there is,
Horsham?
please, yes. In the agenda for today, one of the questions it says is the identified funding gap too great to suggest a realistic prospect of delivery?
District-wide of all necessary infrastructure.
Correct. In the paper submitted by the council in response to that point, which is an identified document on the website, they actually declare the infrastructure funding gap as just over £10 million. As a direct result of the viability of North Horsham, but on the wider infrastructure, that gap has now been increased by over 75% to £18 million. So it's a perfectly legitimate question.
How has it increased?
How has it increased?
Well, is it different from... OK, can the council deal with that question, please?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Originally, when the infrastructure delivery plan was undertaken, the projected income was based on the £125 district-wide and the £50 for land north of Horsham.
Okay.
In retesting the viability appraisals to support this examination and the matter statement for the land north of Horsham, during the retesting, it was identified that a zero seal charge would be relevant to that site. So, therefore, that funding gap would have indeed increased to round about 17, just over 17 million. So originally it was just over 10, now it's just over 17. I think that although that funding gap has increased, the council would still be of the view that that isn't so significant, that sufficient infrastructure couldn't be delivered to support the new development set out in the HDPF, and that indeed in order to charge the seal you do need a funding gap, and there are also other funding sources that would be available to the council as set out in the matter statement, which could come forward through funding such as new homes bonus, lottery funding and other government grants as well. So the council is certainly of the view that although that funding gap has increased, it's not so significant that sufficient infrastructure couldn't support the growth set out in the plan.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the point we're trying to make is quite simple, and that is in document HDC 15, response to matter 17. It declares categorically the infrastructure funding gap is £10,295,021. As you just heard, that figure is incorrect. It has increased, and you're actually £1 million out, because the actual figure is £18,070,671, which is a 75% increase in funding gap. So the point is simply, you said before, or the council asserted before, that a 10 million funding gap was manageable. Are they now saying an 18 million funding gap is okay and manageable? That is simply the point, and the information provided is inaccurate.
Are you saying that £18 million is manageable? As a gap?
Just over 17, sir. And indeed...
Sorry, 18 million and 70.
Okay, whether it's 17 or 18 million, again, we are still of the view that sufficient infrastructure can be funded through the combination of developer contributions. In terms of the evidence that is before you, in terms of the viability appraisal, which the updated one sets out a zero seal charge, which is indeed a change from the previous ones that formed part of the viability appraisal for the preliminary draft charging schedule.
Okay. I'll look at that.
Excuse me, so could I just simply add, it would be nice if the submitted document was corrected, and just for clarity...
Well, I've got that note,
yeah,
don't worry.
The reason why the main reason why the SIL for North Horsham was reduced was the sudden appearance of abnormal costs of £12 million, which were previously declared as zero, so you might like to ask that question when you look into it. Thank you.
Well, I've got that information. I've got those assessments, and there's also the issue of affordable housing provision and policy compliance there. Right, Ms. Fletcher, I'm trying to wrap this up by 2 o'clock. What's your point?
I understand that there's some level of discretion as to whether things are charged under SIL or under Section 106.
No.
When we last spoke to the officer...
Well, that's not true. There isn't. There's no local discretion to comply or not with the SIL regulations.
When we
that's
last
what you mean.
spoke... No, not whether to comply with the regulations, but exactly how different expenditure would be accounted for, whether it could be taken from SIL or 106. We were told that there was some level of discretion for the council in that, but there is a double dipping issue. That if you put something on a SIL list, it can't be taken as Section 106. If you put something if you don't put it on the SIL list, you can't have it. We're concerned from a cycling point of view.
That's not true either. I mean,
this is what we're being told by the council.
You can have what you want, actually, but I mean, there's an issue about double dipping, and there are requirements for Section 106 payments to be mistreated. But anyway, what's your point?
The point is that the infrastructure that's required for cycling, by its nature, is often partly on-site, partly off-site, and what's on-site for one development may be off-site for another.
It doesn't mean it can't be funded through Section 106 site-specific if it's directly related to the development.
The experience that we have so far is of concern. So, for example, in the West of Worthing Road development, there were Section 106 requirements for upgrading Hoppost roundabout, I understand, in order to be able to access Horsham. But proposals that the Cycling Forum put forward for infrastructure upgrading to allow access to Christ Hospital and to bypass Hoppo's roundabout, although they actually were closer to the development than Hoppost is, we were told that they were strictly off-site and are too far away off-site to be relevant for Section 106 funding. So our concern is that it's much harder in practice, and this goes back to the effectiveness of the document, to get Section 106 funding for cycling measures than it possibly is for motorised transport, whereas obviously sustainable transport is meant to be prioritised.
Well, did the council want to comment on that or not?
I think it just goes back to the tests of Section 106 under Section 122 and the 3 criteria, and if it's considered that something is relevant to that development and in accordance with those 3 tests, then therefore we can negotiate for contributions towards that. So we're very much determined by the regulations in that sense.
Our experience would be that it's ineffective in action.
Well, OK, I've got the point. I know the regulations. Finally, Councillor Arthur.
Yes, I'm still a bit concerned. The amount of money projected is going to be, or the loss, the gap, is going to be compensated for. I'd like to understand more about how that might happen. There only seems to be a limited number of possibilities. You can't get much more blood out of a stone as a developer. The options might be to try to raise the S106, reduce the percentage of affordable homes, or build more houses. I don't believe that we should be relying on the new homes bonus, because that's by no means guaranteed. So I really think we need something a bit more substantial.
Okay, does the council want to make any other comments on that as a final point?
I don't think there's anything to add from previous comments made on the gap.
Yeah, okay. I've noted the point there about the gap. It's a comment. I mean, in my experience, there always is a gap, and I think Councillor Arthur's quite rightly identified some possibilities about how it could happen. The council have said others which he doesn't agree with. I think I'll just take that away and weigh it up. I haven't got any other questions. It's gone on quite a long time, considering I didn't have any statements really at all for this particular session of the examination, but there we go. I hope you all feel that you've had a chance to say what you want to say about infrastructure, as well as everything else. So I'm going to draw this session to a close. I think I've already said where I am with my sort of where we go next with this is that I'm just going to go home and consider all the evidence from all the sessions and all the statements, do some site visits. I've been curtailed a bit in what I think I might get to today, but anything, if I want to ask any further questions of anyone, that will all have to be done publicly. If there are any documents that are accepted, they'll be available on the website. I remind everyone it's your responsibility to check the website. If there was anything, obviously major, we would send emails out, I think, to participants and objectors. But there would be, everything will be on the website, and if a new document's accepted, then they'll be available for comment by everybody. That extends the process. But the examination is not concluded until my final report comes in. And it's up for me to decide what to do with the examination. Particularly if I think main modifications are required, then obviously the examination will remain open, and there will be obviously full public consultation about those. So that's all I want to say, actually. Thanks. Except thank you very much for your contributions and the way that you've participated in a courteous and polite manner throughout the examination. And the hearings are closed. Thank you.
Sir, what about your question 43, which hasn't been considered? I mean, that really is fundamental. And that is, does the HDPF indicate adequate mechanisms for monitoring its effectiveness? And I do apologise for bringing this up at this stage, but it is a question, and there is the expectation that was going to be considered, sir.
Well, there is, but you haven't said, I haven't got a statement from you about that, I don't think.
Well, you do have, because in my original submission for CPRE Sussex, I did comment on that particular matter.
Right. So what mechanisms do you think? Oh.
Well, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
No, it really is quickly on this one. The MPPF paragraph 177 stipulates that it is important to ensure that there is a reasonable prospect that planned infrastructure is deliverable in a timely fashion. Covering that in part, we've got Strategic Policy 2M, which states the requirement to monitor delivery of the strategy and associated infrastructure in conjunction with partner organisations, developers and landowners, but there's no tangible outcome specified. May I suggest that the clause be added, or the proviso be added, in order to ensure that appropriate infrastructure is provided in time to serve the development or the relevant phase of development, and that be added to Policy 2M, sir. That's my proposal.
What page is that on?
Page 22.
Okay, the council comment, does that go to soundness?
So, could Dr. Smith please say that wording to us again, please?
Yes, of course. I'm quoting from MPPF paragraph 177. What I'm suggesting is that that policy 2M should read, monitor delivery of the strategy and associated infrastructure in conjunction with partner organisations, developers and landowners in order to ensure that appropriate infrastructure is provided in time to serve the development or the relevant phase of the development.
All I would say, sir, is that we would say that that was covered under policy 38 anyway.
Yeah, it was. Okay. My understanding, therefore, is you're looking at the second paragraph of 38 and you're saying this will need to be provided in time to serve the development or the relevant phase. So essentially, you are meeting the MPPF requirement. I accept that, sir. Okay.
And thank you.
Well, the whole plan has to be read as a whole document, so you can't just cherry pick parts from it. Okay, right. That is it. Thanks very much, everybody.